A helicopter landed on the territory of one of the private landing strips, and 5 people got out, dressed rather strangely, and were greeted by a young man with a creative blue hairstyle. The young man looked at the guests and remembered what his father had once told him, that his strange immortality had appeared. It came not from his family, but from his mother, who always kept her body in shape and worked out hard in the gym. He gained the ability to transform. While the boy was thinking, shots and explosions rang out around him, shells hit the building opposite him, and some windows started to burn. It was a world where special and unusual people lived, immortals. There were 2 people on the roof of the building, a blonde girl and a guy with a sniper rifle. The girl was shooting back with the gun, and the guy was holding someone in his sights. At the bottom of this building, there was a fight between a monster and another guy. They were transformers. The 5 strangers in black and a red-haired girl were also involved in this fight. They were superhumans. They were all dressed in special uniforms and armed with rifles. But none of them noticed that among the crowd was a boy magician who was lying helplessly on the road. Suddenly, he saw someone's bloody leg before his eyes. It was a blue-haired boy who had the power of 2 of the 4 bloodlines. He was wounded all over. His clothes were torn and hanging in rags. He stood there feeling very tired and breathing heavily. He was looking at the armed men in black. After catching his breath, he finally told them that he actually had a rank in the special forces of the National Emergency Service. The men in black were silent. Their faces were completely covered by helmets, and one of them was surprised to hear the guy talking nonsense. But each of them thought that the guy was unusual because he was holding one of them like a rag with one hand, and he was no longer alive. Wild anger flashed in the boy's eyes. Suddenly, everyone heard a loud shot, and the bullet flew straight into the body of the blue-haired boy. But he stood steadily on his feet and skillfully dodged the shot. The men in black decided to attack the guy in hand-to-hand combat. Pulling out their daggers, they began to attack, and a fight broke out, the guy skillfully throwing one in all directions. His sword looked more like an irregularly shaped blade, which was extremely sharp, so he seemed to be playing with it, killing the attackers one by one. Although the blue-haired boy fought skillfully because there were more attackers and the fight was uneven, his body also suffered many injuries that were bleeding. The red-headed girl, who was with the men in black, suddenly shouted, "Telekinesis! Keep shooting at him!" and rushed into the battle as well. And the soldiers started shooting with their guns at only one defenseless guy. Suddenly, a strange blue glow appeared over his head, which seemed to give him extra strength. The boy's eyes were once again filled with revenge and fury. With his body, he skillfully dodged all the bullets and began to run away quickly, as if some force was accelerating him. Along the way, he struck clear and accurate punches to everyone who came across his path. The guy's face was covered with blood, but the strangely blue glow did not dissipate. The red-haired girl stopped and looked at the boy in surprise. The guy was running toward her, and he stopped abruptly about 5 meters away. The remnants of the soldiers in black stood around the red-haired girl. "Who are you?" the girl asked in surprise. "I must have forgotten to introduce myself and explain everything," the guy answered her. The guy was breathing heavily. His wounds were showing, and he continued to tell her that his emergency meant that his strength was beyond normal standards. Someone told him about the world before he was born. In the city where the blue-haired boy was later born, there was a crowd of people at a public bus stop in front of a traffic light, and among them was a young man with a cell phone in his hands, no different from the others. Suddenly, the phone rang, and an unidentified number appeared on the screen. The guy looked at the screen in surprise and pressed the accept call button. At that moment, he was crossing the road with the crowd on a pedestrian crossing, and as he answered the call, he looked down at his feet, and something incredible was happening there. A black hole that appeared in the middle of the crosswalk was growing and swallowing his feet. He began to quickly sink into it, as if something was pulling him down, and the crowd of people, seeing this picture, screamed and scattered in different directions. Only the boy's head and one arm were visible on the surface of the hole. And in the middle of the hole, there was another world with monsters. The black hole was steadily growing in size, swallowing everything around it. Its size was becoming catastrophic, and all of humanity was trying to prevent it. But there were more and more civilian casualties. Bodies of people were lying all over the city. In the middle of the square was a little boy of about 6 years old. His body was bloody. He was lying there crying bitterly. In front of him, the boy could only see someone's male legs. It was some stranger in a tracksuit with a hood on his head. He was looking carefully into the distance. The black hole that appeared in the ground was a black gate through which there was a connection with other worlds. It was in the sky and on the surface of the ocean. From these black holes came other forms of life that were different from ordinary people, and they began to exterminate everyone, and the world turned into hell. And as a result, superhumans appeared. They could use telekinesis, magic, freezing, and had other skills. Even if these superhumans had their hands cut off or their organs cut off, they did not die because they were immortal. These superhumans could transform into any animal, such as a bear or a wolf, and they were also called shapeshifters. There were also other people who could use special skills. These were magicians. And it was these superhumans who fought back the enemies from the black hole, and the world regained its peace again. It was a year that everyone called the Year of Horror. When the situation changed, people's attention shifted to special kinds of people. It was said that these people were carrying dangerous molecules, and that was why quarantine was necessary. Fear of them led to the division into special and normal people, and through this process, immortals began to belong to the government of the country, and the shapeshifters colluded with the international company Excursion. Superhumans created their own organization, Psionic, and hidden it with the help of magic. 20 years have passed since that terrible day. The special people were constantly hiding somewhere, but everyone knew that they were around and living among them. A family was shopping at the local supermarket. The father turned to his son, who was standing next to him. "I want to tell you something important, but don't be surprised," the father continued. "In fact, you are immortal," the father quietly told the blue-haired boy, who looked at him with square eyes. The father was silent and thought. Then he explained that since he was immortal, his blood must have passed to him. "But why do you tell me this in the store, when you buy groceries?" his son asked in surprise. The father didn't seem to hear him and continued to speak, telling him not to tell his mother, who hadn't known about his immortality all her life. "Ooh, Dad, but immortals have clear skin and a beautiful face," the son said, his face covered with pimples. "I realize that you look nothing like me, but you are immortal," his father laughed. "You see, son, immortal blood awakens on the 24th birthday, and you were born at 11 o'clock in the evening." The man continued to blurt out loud, and then they calmly continued to look at the store window, discussing the purchase of garlic and who would peel and cut it. The father took the bag of garlic and asked his son Gavanik not to say anything to his mother, because his mother and his wife did not know all their family life, that her husband and the father of the child was immortal. He was afraid that if she found out, she might want to divorce him because he hadn't told her. They both got to the supermarket checkout, and the father suggested that they finish the deal outside. Their bag was full of groceries for the holiday dinner. Gavanik easily took the full bag with one hand and went outside, while his father paid at the checkout and watched him go. He was pleased to think that his son was extremely strong. They went home, and on the way, the father continued to tell Gvanik that immortals are born with low strength, and that's probably why his son subconsciously trains so much. "I don't train that much," his son laughed at him. He looked at the huge bag of food and thought that perhaps that was why he had such strength. It was probably his second secret, or rather, probably the first. They got to the apartment, and opening the door, his father shouted that they were back and quietly said that he had been hiding it even before he knew he was immortal. Their mother greeted them, asking cheerfully if they had finally returned. She was the secret. Then she slyly asked her husband if he had bought garlic, looking into the bag of food. Yes, of course, her husband smiled at her. "It's not minced?" the mother laughed. The father laughed and gently took her hands and said that of course not. And she kissed him gently. They loved each other very much despite their age. "Hey, your son is still here and he's watching," Gvanik shouted to them cheerfully. "The groceries are ready," she answered her son cheerfully. Looking at her, Gvanik remembered their conversation 2 years ago. Then his mother asked him if he could transform into Sailor San, or Deviltail, for example. She meant the Japanese characters from famous stories. Then the guy asked her in surprise if she was a shapeshifter. She replied that yes, she was a shapeshifter, and so was he. She went on to explain that shapers awaken at the age of 18, so he would most likely start to awaken tonight. The guy was shocked. It was quite unexpected for him. She conspiratorially whispered to him that it was a secret for his father. She told him never to tell his father about it. Gavanik opened the refrigerator and started to take out food when his mother asked him what he wanted for his birthday. His father had already come into the kitchen when Gwanka told her that he didn't want anything. "You don't want anything. Don't cry later," his mother laughed. I am already very grateful to you for giving birth to me, he smiled. The father and mother began to talk to each other. Our son speaks well, just like his father, she said. No, he just has a good temperament like you, his father replied. Gavanik stood and admired them. He had the best parents in the world. My father is immortal. My mother is a shapeshifter. I have very special parents, he thought. At that time, his mother brought a birthday cake into the kitchen. His father looked at it and noticed that it was missing one candle and was about to go out to buy it. But they all decided that a candle would not spoil the celebration and decided to eat it anyway. After a while, they all said goodnight to each other and went to bed. Gavanik, having eaten enough, lay down on the bed with relief, but he could not sleep. Looking at his watch, he noticed that in 20 minutes it would be 11 o'clock in the evening, as his father had said that he would become immortal at that time. He remembered asking his father outside the store if he had been in pain when he woke up, and he told him that everything was fine. He just felt his blood heat up and then turn cold, and as soon as he felt the cold, his 5 senses became much sharper than they had been before. Didn't it really hurt? Gwinnett questioned him, remembering that when he became a shapeshifter, he thought he was dying. He asked his father again if he was really going to wake up, because his mother was an ordinary person. His father assured him that it would definitely happen, because the blood of an immortal is much thicker than that of an ordinary person. Gavanik wanted to ask his father something else, but after thinking about it for a second, he changed his mind. The father was surprised to notice that his son was somewhat confused. The boy was lying on the bed and wondering if he could wake up as an immortal when he had already awakened as a shapeshifter. He didn't know how he would explain to his father if he couldn't wake up as an immortal, so he decided to let it be and went to bed. At exactly 11 o'clock in the morning, Gavanik felt a wild pain throughout his body that made him fall off the bed and onto the floor, and he mentally cursed. He writhed in pain and remembered his father, who had told him that it didn't hurt at all. He could barely get down on his knees and hugged his head in pain. His body was shivering, and he was breathing heavily. Unable to withstand the headache, he became dizzy and fell to the floor again, his body not listening. He could not see anything. His ears were ringing, the room was spinning, and he had no strength to get up. Cold sweat covered his entire body, and he could not say a word. This story will be about his abnormal life in a normal world. He remembered how 2 years ago, at the same time and on his birthday, he stood in the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and could not believe his eyes as he looked at his new body. He had just woken up, and his body was already absolutely perfect. At that moment, his mother came into the bathroom and asked him if he liked it. The boy jumped up in fright. "Can't I knock?" Gavanik screamed in fright. The mother laughed and said that she just wanted to see if he was okay, and he looked very nice. "So tell me, how does it feel to be a shapeshifter?" asked his mother. Gavanik told her that he felt tremendous energy, and his hearing and senses became more sensitive. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked his mother. She looked at him in surprise, and Gavanik explained to her that until that moment he had been constantly losing his hair. He vomited blood endlessly, not understanding why, and he felt his muscles as if they were being torn apart. "Why didn't you tell me it would hurt so much, Mom?" he asked her again. His mom stood there and listened to him in surprise. Vanik explained to her that if he had known, he would have at least prepared himself mentally. He asked her again if his awakening was successful, and if it would not happen again. She told him not to worry, that it would not happen again, because it was not a game. Gavanik breathed a sigh of relief because he didn't want to go through something like that again. He was sure that he would never feel such pain again. The whole incident came back to him as he tried for the 10th time to get up on his legs, which would not listen to him. Gavanik started to cry from the pain. He was not used to not being able to control his body. The guy suffered on the floor until the morning, and only when the sun began to rise did he finally feel much better. He made it to the bathroom to look at his transformation. Standing in front of the mirror, Vanik carefully examined his face, constantly stretching the skin on his cheeks. His whole body ached, despite the fact that he was now immortal. The guy analyzed his current sensations. Outwardly, he hadn't changed at all, but in terms of sensations, he could now see well in the dark, and all other senses were heightened. His ears were ringing because his hearing had become too sensitive. He tried to calm himself down, just as he had when he became a shapeshifter and controlled his new body. If I make myself think that my ears are far away, Gwynic thought, and after a moment, the ringing in his ears went away. He really had the feeling that he had awakened as an immortal at last. Gwank looked into his eyes and wondered if he would be able to control himself as he needed to. His mother called him to breakfast, and after washing up, he went into the kitchen and looked at his plate in surprise. The plate was full of fried meat. It was unrealistically large. "Is this my breakfast?" he asked his mother in surprise. His mother told him that she would make more if he wanted it, but the boy didn't hear her and thought about his portion. He thought that now his family was eating even more than before. He had heard that shapeshifters need more energy than an ordinary person, but his father also ate a lot. Did special kinds of people eat so much? Meanwhile, his father asked his mother that he thought there was less food on the table than usual and if she was okay. She replied that there was rice cooking in the rice cooker right now, so he shouldn't worry. Despite everything, they did not suspect each other. The father turned his attention to his son and called out to him. He told him to prepare for the civilian service exam. "Civilian service?" the boy asked him. "Is this so sudden?" His mother replied, shocked. The father explained to his wife that a good opportunity had arisen, namely, that Gavanik could go to college because he had turned 20. They started a discussion, and his father explained that college was not as important as the skills a person possesses, and that a job as a civil servant is very good, because he himself had also studied there. The mother replied that she didn't think it was bad, but she didn't want her son to go to Goshiwan so early, which is a place where people who are preparing for exams live, and it was a very small room. "He doesn't need to go to Goshiwan, he's smart enough." His mother couldn't stop herself. Gwank listened to them and thought that his parents rarely disagreed with each other. The boy ate in silence and thought that immortals usually have jobs related to the government, and so his father probably wants to send him to a similar position. After breakfast, Gwank went to the gym and started working out. He did 15 pull-ups and was surprised to tell his mother that he used to do a maximum of 2 pull-ups, but now he could do 15 without running out of breath. The woman laughed and explained that shapeshifters have 3 times the strength of an average person. "So you're not strong for nothing, Mom?" Gvanik asked her. "I'm strong because I train all the time, and that's the main rule," his mother answered. "There is one more thing that shapeshifters are stronger at besides their physical strength," she continued to say. Gvanik asked her in surprise what it was, and she explained that it was the instinct of a shapeshifter, which is much stronger than that of an ordinary person, and there will be many cases in his life when he will be guided by his instincts. "But I don't feel these instincts yet," Gwynic told her. "This is true now, but there will be situations when it will become a problem when you are in the real world," his mother explained. The mother added that in order to control instincts, you need to train constantly, and that is why she would like her son to go to college and then start working for the company. She began to do pull-ups with ease, and at the same time, continued to say that their grandfather had connections in the industry that works with shapers, and that he needed to go to a normal college so that he could get a job there. Gvanik listened to her in confusion. After training, the whole family sat down to dinner. The father said that he thought they should ask Gvanik, not just discuss it among themselves. The mother looked at her son and asked if he wanted to become a civil servant. The boy stopped chewing in surprise, and a thought flashed through his mind that he really wanted to do something, but he had never told his parents. And he loudly blurted out that he would like to join the IDT, a special unit of the South Korean Navy. His parents stared at him in shocked silence, not expecting this answer. "Think about it," his mother told him sharply, her face showing that she was not happy with the idea. The father was surprised that his son wanted to become a soldier. For some reason, the mother said that her son probably hadn't thought about it, but Vanik continued to say that he was 20 years old, and he could already think like an adult. The mother said that her son must have gone mad, and the father replied that the military profession was not such a bad choice. "Did you choose it for the uniform?" Gvanik asked his mother. "That too," he laughed. "Well, that's not bad either, because it would be very strange if a 20-year-old guy was already determined to fight for his country," his father summarized. After thinking for a minute, he continued that this was absolutely normal. Not all soldiers go to Somalia to fight pirates. His son can have a wonderful life after his training and assignment anyway. At some point, he will have to serve in the army, and it will be better if he becomes an officer. The mother listened to him and agreed. "He's a good boy," the father thought, looking at his son. "Then can I do it now?" Gvanik asked his parents. His mother replied that you can, but not now. Gwank said that he understood that he had to prepare for the college exams for the civil service, and his father explained to him that if he passed the exams, he could postpone his post and join the military, but if he didn't want to, he could get a job in the defense industry, and it would be a big bonus if he went there as an officer. "Is that how it works?" asked his son. At the same time, he thought that logically it seemed possible, and his father would be able to help him with this. He took a piece of meat and announced to everyone that if so, he would pass the exam. His father continued to say that this exam is not so straightforward and difficult, but it is not easy either, so you have to prepare for it anyway. There is a person in Huaxiong who will give him intensive lessons, so he will study on his own, and on weekends he will do it. Huang humbly agreed. But wait, he exclaimed a moment later. Where is this, in Huaxiong? He asked his father again, and he confirmed. The next day, the boy was sitting on a bus on his way to see his teacher. It was an acquaintance of his father's who worked on a farm, but didn't want to come to town. Gavanik was not happy about the long journey and wondered if this teacher was so good that he had to travel so far to get lessons. In any case, he never thought he would take the civil service exam, but his ultimate goal was the IDT. Suddenly, he looked at his phone screen in surprise. The screen showed the latest Korean news, and he started to read it quickly. At that moment, the guy thought that he didn't really want to become a military man. Earth's black holes are long gone, but humanity is still fighting each other in search of new resources, and most often shapeshifters are sent to these battles because their strength and ability to exercise make them excellent fighters, Guangyuk thought as he looked out the bus window. My mother didn't want me to take part in these battles, and so he compromised, and he would fulfill her wish as well as his desire to fight by becoming a soldier. But from the very beginning, I did not want to be a soldier, Fanik kept saying to himself in his mind. Meanwhile, the boy's future teacher was on the phone. He received a call from Gvanik's father, Sonbei, who said that he had sent his son to him. Sonbei told the teacher about Gwanik's upcoming exams, and the teacher agreed to teach him. He promised him that he would not spare the boy, just because he was Sonbei's son. The teacher was sitting on the doorstep of his house, looking quite young and athletic. Over the phone, he promised Sonbei to train his son well. After a while, the boy's bus arrived at the teacher's house. He was met by the teacher, whose Panama hat covered half of his face. Gvank looked at him with interest. "Who are you?" the teacher asked after a moment of silence. "I am Gwank, Sonbei's son," the boy answered. "I didn't mean that," the teacher said irritably. After looking at the boy again, the teacher said that he was immortal. But why did he have such a beautiful body? "I guess it's because I have mixed blood," Gwank replied. The teacher asked him again, "What do you mean, mixed blood? Immortals have thick blood. How can human blood be mixed with it?" The teacher asked him again. "Maybe because my mother also has thick blood," Gwankik thought. "What an unusual and unique boy," the teacher thought as he looked at Gvanik. And he led the boy with him and asked Gvanik where they were going. "What do you mean, where? You said you were going to get new knowledge," the teacher replied. "That's right," Gvank replied. He followed the teacher and remembered his father's words that the place where he had come to get knowledge to prepare for the civil service exam was supposed to be a mountain deep in the countryside near the Hwaseong Towers in Gyeonggi Province. And this strange man would now be his mentor. Gwangyuk stared back at him. Maybe because he was also immortal because his face was quite clean and beautiful, the boy continued to think. "Is this a kind of temple?" he asked the teacher. "What a lie!" The teacher answered him without turning around. Gvankik did not understand why they were going to the mountain. After a while, the teacher stopped abruptly and said, "Here." Gwanki was surprised to see why they had stopped. There was an old hut in front of them, but it was quite beautiful and large. "Follow me," the teacher told him, and they walked toward the house. Gvank walked and wondered what his father was trying to teach him. The teacher knelt down at the threshold and picked up a stick and asked if the boy was awake. And what had he already tried? The carpenter answered that he had cut his wrist with a knife, but the wound was not small and healed quite quickly. "Do you know the concept of healing wounds on our bodies?" the teacher asked him slyly. Gvank quietly answered that he did not know. "I don't know either," the teacher laughed out loud. The boy did not understand the meaning of the conversation and asked the teacher again. The teacher told him to listen, that even if they didn't know, they knew the basics of healing properties, because first of all, health, which means that a healthy immortal has good healing power. And secondly, feelings. If you are sensitive, you will feel more pain, but this allows you to recognize it quickly and control it better. Basically, you will quickly notice when a bone goes wrong or something like that, the teacher said, while drawing hieroglyphs with his finger on the sand. In any case, training your health and sensitivity will increase your healing power. The teacher finally finished speaking. Gvank looked at the inscriptions in the sand and did not understand anything. The teacher looked at him carefully and asked if he had any questions about what he had said. Gvank replied that he did not understand something. Then he blurted out that he did not understand what he was doing in this strange place and what it had to do with training. "You are training your health here and learning to control your immortal body," the teacher calmly replied. But Gvanek still did not understand anything. The teacher stood up and asked him irritably why he was talking so much. Doesn't he want to pass the exam? To which Gvanek replied that, doesn't he need a pen and a notebook to study? The teacher smiled slyly and said that this was studying. He went on to say that he was actually going to join the Immortal Special Forces. The boy asked him in surprise what that was. The teacher said, didn't Gvanek's father say anything? He had just heard that it was a civil service exam, and it was very similar to being a soldier in the army. Gvanek wondered what about his service in the IDT. Are you going to join or not? If not, then get out of here, the teacher shouted at the boy. He remembered that he would be able to do whatever he wanted only after passing this exam, and he loudly agreed to study. If you don't want to spoil your clothes, take off your shoes and change into these. And the teacher handed the surprised Gvanek the clothes. The boy stood barefoot on the sand and thought that nothing had changed. He took off his pants and remained standing in his shorts and continued to think that the topic of the exam was a little different from what he had imagined. The teacher told him to run faster because he was tired of looking at it. At that moment, Gvanek saw thousands of daggers sticking up from the sand with their blades, and he exhaled loudly. The teacher sat and watched him with interest. He looked at his watch on his wrist and shouted to the boy not to dare to rest, because he was not going to stop when the enemy was chasing him, was he? And Gvanek ran straight through the dagger blades, trying to avoid getting hurt, but there were so many of them that his legs were all cut and oozing blood at the finish, and he fell down in pain and couldn't get up. The teacher calmly approached him and asked if he had really dodged some of the daggers in the center, because some students could not do it at all, and this meant that the boy had good reflexes. Havaniak was silent. He couldn't say anything because of the pain, and the teacher was also silent and thinking about something. He looked at the boy's legs, which were healing right before his eyes, and said that he had amazing healing skills. Your regeneration is accelerated every time you heal from wounds, so you shouldn't run away from the blades. Step on them to make more wounds, the teacher continued. And he ordered Fanik to step on the blade on purpose and cut his leg. The boy continued to remain silent, gritting his teeth in pain, only thinking that this teacher was out of his mind to suggest such a thing. Stop reacting and run, the teacher shouted at him, and Gvanek struggled to his feet and ran. What kind of a boy is so unusual? Thought the teacher, looking after him. Gvanek ran all the daggers again and sat down at the finish line exhausted. The teacher came to him and told him that he would not die because he was immortal, and ordered him to get up and run again. Gvanek furiously asked him how much longer he had to do it. Until you feel shock, the teacher calmly replied. As soon as you feel shock for the first time, your pain threshold will increase. This training prepares it for panic from fear or concussion in battle, but the teacher didn't understand why Vanik wasn't getting shocked and asked him if he was in pain. He shouted that his pain was infinite. The boy was furious, thinking that he had the body of a shapeshifter before he became immortal, and because shapeshifters have strong bodies, such training would never cause shock, even if he trained like that all his life. So he asked the teacher if there were other ways to achieve the desired result. He asked how fast he could run a 50-meter race. Gwanki replied that he could do it in 6 seconds. This dagger distance is exactly 50 meters long, and if you run it in 6 seconds, it means that the training on blade sharpening is complete, the teacher told him. Just 6 seconds to run? Gvank asked him again. The teacher confirmed, and the boy angrily agreed. You better not take it back later, Gvank snapped at him. At that moment, the boy looked at his bloody feet and thought that he had just said that he would run 50 meters in 6 seconds. But this was only possible if he ran at a moderate pace. He realized that this run would be very painful, but there was only one way out, and that was to block out his feelings as much as possible and run as fast as he could. Gvanko gathered his courage, and with the thought that it was only 6 seconds and it would be easy, he pulled himself together and ran. The teacher, who was looking at this madness with square eyes, was numb. Meanwhile, the boy was running through razor-sharp daggers, cutting his legs to the bone, right up to the knees. Finally, this marathon was over, and Gvanek fell exhausted on the sand with the thought that he must have made it within those hateful 6 seconds. He got up in pain and tried to catch his breath. The teacher laughed out loud with pleasure. "What an interesting guy," the teacher shouted loudly at Gvanek's back. "Now do it again," he shouted. The boy turned around in surprise and asked how he hadn't heard. "Didn't I complete the task?" Gvanek added. "I just checked the stopwatch," the teacher slyly replied and showed him his phone. "Now we'll start the second training session," the teacher shouted loudly. "Here, take this," and he handed Vanik some kind of incomprehensible chain. The boy took it in his hands in surprise and began to examine it, then asked if it was a dog collar. The teacher explained to him that he would need it for the second day of training, so he had to put it around his neck. "I feel a little uneasy. What are we going to do?" Gvanek asked him again. "We're going to do a breath-holding drill." Gvanek's eyes rounded. He tried to ask the teacher something in surprise, but it was just a mumble. The teacher calmly showed him the remote control and explained that when he pressed the button on it, the collar would squeeze the boy's neck. Gvanek untied the collar in surprise. The teacher told him not to untie it, but to tie it again and asked him, since he had run through a field of knives, if he would return home that easily. The boy sat down and grabbed his head and wailed that he couldn't just dive into the water and hold his breath. The teacher calmly explained to him that diving underwater is not enough. Training with a collar is necessary to withstand strangulation, and everything can end badly if Vanek loses consciousness during a fight, so it is necessary for him. He went on to say that when working with blades, Gwanka pays a lot of attention to feinting. Then the teacher told him that after that terrible year of a terrible war against special species, ordinary people learned to resist them. They used to practice strangulation by hanging from trees, but now the world is a better place. The boy thought at these words that he hadn't gotten any better at such things. Scratching the back of his head, Gvanek asked sadly, "What are the conditions for passing the exam?" "There are none. You will lose consciousness and must stand for at least 5 minutes, the teacher explained. "I also recommend that you don't unbuckle your collar or steal the remote control if you don't want to get a hole in your heart, although this is also a form of training," the teacher continued. "Are you ready?" he asked the boy again. Gvanek replied that he was ready, and with that, the teacher pressed the button on the remote control. At that moment, the collar sharply squeezed the boy's neck, and he only managed to say, "Ugh," and "huh," and dug his nails into the sand. Black spots appeared in front of Gvanek's eyes, and he started to feel dizzy. On his knees, he began to cough and instinctively grabbed at the collar. He began to pull the collar away, which was getting tighter and tighter. The teacher, who was standing next to him, noticed this and slammed the shelf on the boy, saying, "No, I can see you can still handle it," the teacher said as he watched Gvanek suffer. "But if you can't take it anymore, then just pass out," the teacher said his instructions. The boy mentally cursed. "God, when will this be over? 5 minutes have already passed," he thought chaotically, and at that moment he began to realize that he was losing consciousness. His thoughts were fragmentary, everything was swimming before his eyes, and he began to think only one thing, that he was already at the limit of his capabilities. And at that moment something strange happened. The guy involuntarily reflexively tensed the muscles of his entire neck. Something clicked quietly at that moment, and the teacher looked at his remote control in surprise and muttered that it had turned off for some reason. "I don't understand. The battery is dead or something?" The teacher looked at the remote control in surprise. The collar fell to the sand with a clatter, and Gvank loudly gasped for air. "I almost died," he shouted to the teacher, who smiled and replied that he would not die. "But we're not going to do this again just because I didn't pass out, are we? I definitely passed out at the 5th minute," the guy exclaimed. He looked at his phone and repeated that it was exactly like that. 12 minutes and 47 seconds, the teacher shouted loudly. Gvanek was stunned by this figure. The boy was speechless and could not say anything but sounds, and only thought that the teacher had said that the record was 8 minutes. He cursed loudly. The teacher laughed and told him not to look at him like a child at a new toy. He suggested that Vanek rest today and get something to eat, and they both went home. "It is inefficient to work when you are hungry, and you need to be healthy," the teacher told him. Gvanek asked if he was going to cook something and offered to help, but the teacher told him to just sit there. "But I don't know how to cook, so it's okay if I just wait," he thought. After a while, the teacher put a bowl of soup in front of Gvanek, which smelled delicious, but for some reason was bright purple, and told him to eat. The boy silently looked at the unusual soup in amazement. He asked what was floating in it. The teacher asked him if he wanted to know. "Not really," Gvanek answered. The soup tasted quite strange, but the boy finished it in silence, and when dinner was over, Gwanka decided to go for a swim in the local river. When he finished swimming, he thought that maybe next time he would have to cook his own meals, and that he should learn to cook when he returned home from his mother. But it would be better to ask my father about it. I'd probably call him now, the boy continued to think. He stood silently for a minute in the cold water of the river and said out loud to himself that he was frozen and would probably be better off sleeping, and quickly walked away. He reached the house and stopped. It was dark. He groped his way into the house and asked the teacher why there was no light, and the teacher explained that all the bugs flocked to the light, and it was very annoying. When Gavanik's eyes got used to the darkness, he saw the teacher lying on the floor, ready for bed. The boy sighed softly. He was also very tired, and his body was exhausted from today's training. Gavanik began to sit down next to the teacher on the floor where his bed was already prepared. The teacher, who was lying with his back to him, suddenly said that this training was necessary to kill the sense of touch. A good sense of touch makes you feel anxious much more than others. At first, you probably won't be able to close your eyes because of the discomfort, and suddenly he stopped talking. For a few seconds, the teacher listened to the silence in silence and waited for Gwank to fall asleep. Then he quietly got up and looked at the boy, who was sleeping in a deep sleep. Hearing the boy's snores, the teacher calmed down and fell asleep as well. When morning came, the teacher fried a whole plate of chicken wings, the smell of which spread throughout the house. Gwank looked at the food with pleasure and sincerely thanked him. Immortals use a lot of energy, so eat, the teacher told him. After about 5 minutes, Gwank finally asked the teacher what kind of training they would do today. The teacher calmly replied that it would be cliff jumping. Something crazy again, the boy muttered. The teacher explained that they would have to hold their breath in the air, controlling their senses for the jump. Gwynic replied that based on yesterday's training, the biggest thing an immortal needs to be wary of in combat is the shock and pressure of a hard blow that knocks you unconscious, right? That's right, but there's something else. You have to be careful that your mobility doesn't decrease when your legs are cut, the teacher calmly replied. You have to offer your hand to someone who is going to strike you, which will make you incapacitated. For example, when you are hit on the head or leg, the teacher continued to explain. He went on to say that in addition to this, you have to be careful with a knife and beware of branding and landmines. Hovanik briefly replied that he understood, thinking that all this information was outdated. The teacher ordered him to finish his meal quickly so that he could go to training, and he started chewing faster. After a while, they climbed a mountain, where the teacher told him to concentrate and jump down. In the evening, after finishing his training, Gavanik said goodbye to his teacher. In the morning, he walked toward the bus stop, and after a while got on the right bus, going back to the city. The boy finally called his father and asked if he had given him the right address. He asked why he was asking that. "Because my teacher made me jump from the top," Gavanik exclaimed. His father laughed and told him that immortals don't die from that, so you can do anything with your body. That's the only way to find out how strong your body is, his father continued to explain. Gwank listened to him and thought that all he had learned these days was that his body was really strong. "In any case, you are a great man, so rest at home," his father told him. The boy asked what kind of exam he was taking. The father told him that he was busy and they would talk about it later, and then hung up. The boy looked out the window in silence and thought that today he would really just rest, and nothing would change if he heard the answer. "When I get home, I'll take a bath and play some computer games. And then I'll eat my mom's normal food," Gvanik continued to dream. "And then I'll sleep for about 12 hours in my bed without mosquitoes. Oh, yes." Gvank continued to dream with his eyes closed. It was his perfect vacation plan. At home, his mother met him. She took off her apron and said that he would take his shower later. She wanted Gwank to go somewhere with her. "What?" her son asked her in surprise, and in his head he was running through perfect pictures of the vacation he had invented. His mother answered that she had told his father that he had to get ready for college, and so she had packed Gvanik a bag of things. The boy could not understand why she did this, and replied that he could study on his own. She handed her surprised son a textbook, and cheerfully told him that she had found a good teacher nearby in the neighborhood. Gvanik was numb. "You'll be staying there for 2 nights, his mother chirped cheerfully. The boy could not believe his ears. He had a bad feeling about this. Meanwhile, his mother called the elevator and said she would come for him in 2 days. "Aren't you even going to introduce me to the teacher?" asked the surprised Gvanik standing in the elevator, to which his mother cheerfully replied that everything was fine. "It's not enough to be smart," she said. You also need to have a strong body, she shouted to her son as the doors closed. Vanik stood in the middle of the elevator and finally realized what awaited him. And it was definitely not college, the guy laughed out loud hysterically. After a while, the elevator doors opened. Gavanik got out of the elevator and looked around. It was the floor of a gym with treadmills. There was a lot of equipment, lined up in endless rows. Vaniak wondered aloud if they had arranged the underground parking lot like this, and then he saw an unfamiliar girl approaching him. She approached him and asked if it was him. Vanik was silent. It was the first time he had seen her, and he was confused and could not say anything. "Are you Solhei's son?" she asked the boy. The girl was beautiful and had an athletic body dressed in a matching suit. "Yes, I am, but I don't understand why my mother sent me here," Gwanki replied. To which the girl replied that his mother said he would be here to train for 2 days in a row, the trainer told him. She added that his physical potential would be wasted if he used only his brain like a nerd. At this point, Gwanki remembered his training on the mountain and laughed. He couldn't tell the whole truth even here. The girl told Gwank to get ready for boxing and change his clothes. She also put on boxing gloves and stood opposite him in the boxing arena. Gavanik looked at her and thought that when he rebelled against his mother, it would be beaten out of him. He realized that refusal didn't work here because he could see it in the coach's eyes. "Take this," the girl said, handing him an electronic watch. "What is it?" asked Gavanik, who was already afraid of such things after the collar. "It's a device for measuring. You need to put it on your arm and leg," the trainer explained. "Aren't you going to train me?" asked Gavanik, who still couldn't understand what was happening. The trainer replied that he needed to be tested first. "How are you going to test me?" the boy asked. And the coach answered briefly, "Now." She pointed to the treadmill and told Gavanik to start running. While the boy was running, the coach was looking at something on her phone. "I heard that you don't train yourself," the coach told him. The boy continued to run. The coach was looking at the tracker on her phone and commenting that his heart rate was normal, but is that all he could do at this level? She asked Gavanik. Gavanik was already wet from running, and he kept wondering why she was making fun of him. "Lazy. Something very lazy. It's probably because the modern world has everything you want, right?" asked his coach. The boy listened to her in surprise, and for some reason thought that they were not the same age. Gvank was running as hard as he could and wailing to himself about why he was doing this. The trainer increased the speed on the treadmill, and he started running even faster, barely catching his breath. She suggested that he do cardio first and consistently make his body perfect. "I will make you reborn from head to toe." The girl laughed. Gavanik could not understand what she meant. "I don't want a second mother," the boy shouted, hacking on the path. "Is it because you are Sole's son?" "You like to make jokes," the coach replied. The boy thought that he was not joking and continued to run. It was already evening and the training was still going on. Gavanik ran on that hated track until the evening. The coach was laughing at him and telling him not to stop because even her grandmother would not have died from such a thing. It was scary to look at Gvanik. He was all wet, barely breathing, and his legs were no longer feeling. 14 hours, 4 minutes, 32 seconds, he barely managed to say. He was shocked by this training and only thought that he would have to run all night without a break. And even in training, immortals were given time to rest. The trainer continued to lecture him that if you fight just by trusting your body, then without training, you will just be at the amateur level. Then she turned on a big TV in front of Gavanik's eyes and told him that while he was running, he should watch and listen to the TV. "It shows the stretching we will do after the run. So memorize it," she told him. Gvanik watched the video and thought that the human body cannot bend like that. "You have to train your flexibility because a wooden body is very bad," the girl continued to say monotonously. The boy mentally snapped back. "I wish I could ask a question, but I'm already out of breath, even with my shapeshifter body, running for 14 hours. I'm out of breath," Gwank thought without stopping. "Time!" his coach shouted at him. Gwank quickly shouted out that it was 14 hours, 10 minutes. He had to keep track of the time because the coach kept asking him. He also had to keep track of the training and listen to what the teacher was saying. It was a really tough training. "But I can do it," he said loudly in his head. And he remembered the training with the previous teacher on the mountain when he asked him what feelings and sensations were. And he remembered their conversation when the teacher told him that Gwynnett could block his senses, but that was not enough, because if many senses were dulled, his body movements would be chaotic. To do this, you need to clear your mind of the sensation you want to block, and at the same time, make another sensation more accurate, the teacher told him at the time. Gwenk decided to apply this knowledge of multitasking to his training. He began to analyze that he had 4 tasks, but the running was done by his body, and the training and the video were not happening at the same time. If you leave aside the sense of time, then performing all the other tasks is not so difficult. With this thought in mind, he continued to run stubbornly, and he managed to multitask because he had been running on the treadmill for 24 hours. Finally, the trainer turned off the treadmill, and the marathon was over. The girl looked at his vitals and told him that his brain was perfectly fine. She told him to relax his body because flexibility is essential in this kind of work. They moved to the yoga room, and the trainer asked if Vanik remembered the video. She began to demonstrate what was shown on the video and told him to follow her closely. The coach knelt down and quickly bent across her back into an arc. Gwynek was fascinated by her flexibility because it was something incredible. The girl bent down and told him to try it too. Gavanik obediently knelt down and began to bend slowly across his back. The boy started to puff because it was the first time he had ever done this, and his back started to crack. "Take your time. Flexibility takes time," the trainer told him. "We'll increase the amplitude a little bit, repeating the same pose every day. In other words, we'll slowly tear your muscles," she said. It was very painful for the guy, but he thought that healing after such tears would increase his flexibility. But he clearly knew that immortals heal quickly after injuries, and it turns out that he didn't need to do it little by little. Gvank tensed up and bent so much that he failed at this exercise the first time, because he thought he only needed to endure this short-term pain. The trainer shouted, "Hey!" and rushed over to him. "What?" asked her boyfriend. "I told you not to overdo it," the coach yelled. But it was too late to say anything, because Gvanek had done it right the first time. "But I did it the first time, right?" he asked the girl again. The coach was silent and stared at him admiringly, thinking at that moment what an interesting guy he was. "We've had enough training for today, let's eat," the girl suggested, and they went into the kitchen. De Gwynek saw a whole pig carcass roasting in the oven. He looked at the girl in surprise, and she replied that it was only for her that much meat. "And this is yours." She waved her hand at another mountain of roasted meat. Gvanek was surprised to think, is it really one whole pig for one person? "Eating is also training, so get used to accumulating enough energy to move later," the girl explained, putting on nitrile grease gloves. They both sat down and began to eat their carcasses, which, by the way, was very tasty. 2 days for training is not enough time, not even enough time to learn the main points, the trainer said. Gvank was busy eating. He hadn't eaten for a whole day, but he was skeptical that it was very tasty, but it was just well-fried pork with spices. "Maybe it tastes so good because I haven't eaten for a long time," he thought. The girl ordered him to finish everything and leave nothing behind, and they continued to chew in silence. Gvanek mumbled that he hadn't left food since he was a child because he was taught to. The coach finished eating and told Gwank to wash his face and go to bed after dinner, but the boy continued to eat voraciously. When he was full, Gwanka sat down to rest with satisfaction, and finally the moment had come. Looking at his sports bed, he thought that it was much better than sleeping with mosquitoes in the forest. And it really was. And unlike his previous teacher, here he could use the phone, and the boy decided to call his mother. After a couple of rings, he heard his mother's voice asking how he was doing. He replied that he was fine. His mother replied that she had told the coach several times not to take him easy, just because he was her son, and they had known each other for a long time. "But I'm still worried about you," the mother told him. "If she is too soft with you, then tell the coach to be stricter," the mother ordered. Then she said that her father had come and that she was already busy, and after saying goodbye, the woman hung up. Gvank did not have time to say anything, and only listened to the short beeps on the phone in surprise. But during the first day of training, he realized something. If training for an immortal is about mentality, then training for a shapeshifter is about impolite actions. The next day, the trainer told him that they would be lifting weights. She started asking how many kilograms the guy could lift and what were his best performances. She put a lot of weight on him, and Vanik barely lifted the bar off the floor with a miserable face, thinking he was going to die. The coach encouraged him loudly, counting each lift, and said that knowing and exceeding your abilities is the essence of training. The guy finally ended his torment. The trainer instructively told him that science must be added to the training of a shapeshifter, and that many devices and electronic applications must be used. She looked closely at Gvanek's performance on the tablet and said that he had very poor reflexes. Gvanek rolled his eyes, which did not bode well. She added another 20 kilograms to the barbell, which already had a total weight of 60 kilograms, and ordered Gwanek to lift it. The guy lifted the bar to chest height and thought it would be easy, because the strength of a shapeshifter is 3 times that of an ordinary person. The girl ordered him to follow her with the barbell. "Now run with it," she ordered the surprised boy. "Run, I said," she shouted. "Run," whispered Gvanek, gathering his strength. And the boy ran. A few minutes later, he stopped in front of the stairs and asked the coach if he was sure he was running to the right place. Looking at the stairs in surprise, he thought that this must be the second part of the crazy training after the sharp blades. The guy was evaluating the stairs, and the trainer said that he needed to keep his balance and center of gravity, and that he needed to use his reflexes. "Will that work?" Gvanek asked her again. She explained that he would repeat it over and over again until he got it right. He looked at the entire march, and at the stairs and thought, the width of the stairs is very small, only half his foot. "Is it okay if I accidentally fall?" he asked the trainer. The girl was looking at the tablet and replied that there was little chance of injury from a height of 3 meters, but that he should not run if he planned to fall. You see, the primary task of a shapeshifter is to protect his body, and this is not beneficial on the battlefield, as their bodies do not automatically recover like immortals, she explained. The guy decided to just run and let things happen. He knew that as an immortal, broken bones would not be a problem, and he decided to run, preparing to fall just in case. As he ran, Gwynek was surprised to notice that his sense of touch could feel the pressure on his sneakers and find his balance. His 5 senses were greatly enhanced. Although most shapeshifters have frantic reflexes, they can't compete with immortals who specialize in senses, the coach shouted at his back. Gwynek thought he could do it. It seemed like a fun and interesting workout, and at least his legs would be intact and not cut by blades, so he started running fast. He ran successfully and shouted out with satisfaction that he had successfully completed his distance. At that moment, the guy was very proud of himself that he hadn't fallen with that barbell after all. The coach, who was sitting and watching this action, ordered him to do it 2 more times, back and forth. She was carefully reading something on a tablet and calculating. "The width of the board is 4 centimeters and the length is 50 centimeters, the girl said out loud, thinking that Gvanek had really finished without bending over. She was really surprised by the result. "I'm raising the difficulty of the level," she shouted, and pulled something incomprehensible. "A wire?" The guy looked at the stretched wire at a great angle with fear and surprise. He stood at the top of the stairs and looked at the stretched wire going down from the top to the bottom and asked again if he really had to run on it. "Yes, it's okay. It's called a single-line setup," the coach calmly and businesslike answered him. "The wooden plank was just a small step, to be honest. I thought you were out of it when I looked at your body, but I think you were born with a good body because you have good balance," she explained. The trainer unrolled a huge mattress under the wire and explained to the surprised boy that this mattress was very nice and would not break, but he had to be careful when he fell on it. The carpenter was really surprised that there was a safety mattress this time. "If you grab the wire, your skin will tear, so you just have to fall on the mattress if you can't hold on," she explained. Gvanek looked at all this and thought that he would have to run while carrying the barbell, but he was not afraid of it because it was a light weight for him after the previous training with the immortal. But in terms of difficulty, this level of training was hellish. It was heavier and more challenging. The guy stepped on the wire and noted to himself that it didn't shake much and was quite reliable, and yet it wasn't a fall when the wind was blowing on you, and there was a safety mattress, so it wasn't scary for him. So he decided to try to run along it quickly, and he ran at a fairly high speed. The wire began to loosen from the speed, and Gvanek started to lose his balance. He stopped and started walking more slowly, taking light steps and sometimes bouncing. And he succeeded. At a moderate speed, the guy reached the end without falling. The coach, on that day of training, looked at him as if he was more interesting than the videos she had watched, and ordered him to run in line with the bar all day. She was pleased with the result. The next day, Gvanek packed his things and said goodbye to his coach. Finally, the girl said that they would see each other next week. The boy bowed and agreed. Gvanek's mother was already standing near them. They got into the car, and his mother asked him if he was interested in knowing why she was making him do this. Of course, the boy answered with interest, his body aching with pain. "It hurts me so much to watch my son being beaten." The boy looked at her in surprise. "You have to know the limits of your body. You are too weak now." At that moment, Gvanek remembered all his fights with his friends, where he was the winner, and thought that if his friends heard his mother, they would faint. He didn't want to prove anything to his mother, who didn't know about his immortality and strength, so he just sat there and silently thought that since the circumstances were such, he could still practice, because when he went to the IDT later, he would be able to help, although the heavenly special forces that his previous teacher had mentioned made him a little nervous. Driving home, he kept asking himself the same question. Is he sure he can go to the IDT? Finally, they got home and entered the apartment. His mother had prepared a lot of food, and Gvanek began to eat everything with pleasure and greed, and in 20 minutes, all the plates were completely empty. The boy thanked his mother for the food. The woman looked at him and the empty table in surprise and asked if he had been starving all this time. Gvanek laughed and explained that he realized how valuable her food was after these 4 days. He added that he wanted to learn to cook like her. His mother looked at him in surprise and asked him, "Learn to cook?" Gvanek explained to her that it was in fashion now for men to cook, so he wanted her to teach him for his future wife. "A man cooking is not a bad thing," she said, laughing. "But with your body, you can only be a pig cook for now," she said, looking at her son, whose stomach had grown considerably from eating. "My mom is very clever as always," her son replied, laughing. But the woman didn't let up and explained to him that he had to stop eating so much because the shapeshifter's body wouldn't help. And yet, "Cooking first," he exclaimed to his mother, remembering the immortal teacher's fish head curry dish and how his eyes had shone then. His mother finally agreed to teach him. The boy was happy and thought that the food issue was resolved, but the training would not go away, and he wondered what he would do next week. Will it be the same or something new, he thought. Will the training be even more difficult or the same, thought Gwank, remembering the daggers and the previous trainer. Some time passed, and Gwankit came to the immortal teacher again, who prepared even more frantic training for him, which shocked him even more. After a 4-day break, the stick teacher told him that the training before was just the basic training needed for the entrance exams, meaning that the blade field, keeping from fainting, and jumping off the mountain were now mandatory courses. On this day, Gvanek completed the last course. He jumped off the mountain. He was sitting at the foot of the mountain, bruised, his legs bloody and dizzy. He looked at his bloody legs and arms and thought that maybe due to the frantic training of the shapeshifter, and despite the painful part, this course was much better. The teacher standing at the top of the mountain shouted at him to go up if he was done. The boy looked at him tiredly. He quickly climbed up and stood in front of the teacher and listened to another lecture. The teacher said that one of the advantages of immortality is regeneration. It's when you are shot with a gun and the bullet goes through you, or you can push it out and regenerate your skin and body. This is just basic training, but if a limb is lost, it takes much longer to regenerate. "Is that why you said to be careful?" the guy asked him. The teacher explained that he could receive attacks at a short distance, but still avoid such attacks. And the teacher started waving a huge dagger right in front of Gvanek's nose. The boy recoiled and thought that he was waving it like a murderer. "Is that the reason you're waving the dagger?" The teacher laughed and said that he was thinking the opposite. "That's right. This training is a continuation of the blade training, and that you cannot avoid the blade. Reflect my attack," the teacher shouted at him. And he swung the dagger right at the boy's face, and he intuitively recoiled, and at that moment he was really scared. The teacher attacked again and again, aggressively and for real, and the boy barely had time to escape from the blows. The goal here is to avoid serious injuries. Getting only minor injuries will be useless if you try to avoid getting injured completely, so I'll start with an easy one, the teacher exclaimed to Gwanek. "How can I not avoid it?" the boy asked the teacher. "If I start with your thigh or calf muscles, you need to take the blows with your shins, or move to the side," the teacher explained loudly. "You will still receive the blows from the blade, because I have already made the blade set," the teacher continued to say, while striking Gvanek's body. The teacher stopped and carefully examined the boy, who was covered with cuts, and said that he was regenerating well so they would continue. He got excited. The boy was in a lot of pain, but he got to his feet and went to the teacher to continue this strange fight. After about 10 minutes, the training was over, and the teacher summarized that blood anemia is a weakness for an immortal, looking at the pools of blood near the boy. Gvanek asked him that he must be carrying blood bags for transfusions. The teacher said that this was true because the bleeding had to be stopped early, and the boy could not believe his ears. The teacher suggested that he take a break and finally eat. Gvanek volunteered to be the cook today. The teacher looked at him in surprise and asked him what he would have for dinner. In the makeshift kitchen in the house, Gvank found a tourist tile with a spray can. He put a frying pan on and started chopping vegetables. After a while, the boy cooked a huge plate of spaghetti with meat sauce, the smell of which spread throughout the room, remembering his mother's advice that if you want delicious food, you need to cook something with a lot of sauce. The teacher put the first portion in his mouth and swallowed with pleasure. "This is very tasty," he said. "But your taste buds are fine," Gwynek replied without thinking, and then realized that immortals have good senses, so the teacher could enjoy the taste. "Cooking is also a form of training," the teacher muttered with satisfaction. Gwynek asked him if it was really training. The teacher replied with a mouthful that it was all about dulling the sense of taste. The next day, the boys went out to the lawn, and the teacher suggested that they try it again. Gvank asked him what he meant. "You see, you're used to receiving blows from the blade on the muscles of your arms, and this means..." And the teacher came up to Gvanek and grabbed him by the chest, and the boy felt a sharp pain in his stomach. Gvanek pulled back and saw a huge bloody dagger in his hands, and his hands were dirty. It was time for a workout to regenerate the organs, and explained that regeneration takes a long time, and therefore, basic strength training is mandatory. Gvanek knelt down in pain, holding his wound, but he could feel that regeneration had already begun. His face was covered in sweat. He thought he had no premonition that he would be injured, and asked the teacher how he had done it. The teacher explained to him that he had hidden his traces, and if the enemy has sensitive senses, then one must know how to hide one's energy. The boy was still in pain and could not get up, but he irritably told the teacher that if he was going to poke a hole in his stomach, he should have at least warned him. He looked at his stomach and said that it seemed to be healing, and clarified that he had been wounded, just for the sake of regeneration. The teacher asked him if Gvanek wanted to learn how to hide his energy. The boy answered him firmly that he wanted to, and that he was dizzy. Gvanek returned home, and 2 days later, he was standing in the middle of the gym, calling out to the other teacher. He didn't see that someone was holding a gun nearby and holding him at gunpoint. Gvanek finally saw the coach holding the gun and asked if there was going to be a survival game today. "Something like that," she replied mysteriously. The guy stopped in fright and stared at the girl in silence, not understanding what was happening, and then she shot. He looked at the bullet and realized that it was a modified weapon made of gas and specialized bullets. She fired again and shouted for the guy to dodge. Gvaniak started laughing hysterically. The hamster was enjoying the game. The coach fired a third time, and the sound of the shot cut the silence of the huge gym, and Gvank started running. "Come on, run, the guns are dangerous. Hitting them will severely maim your body," she shouted, firing again and again. Watching Gvanek run chaotically around the gym, the trainer yelled at him to try harder and look for cover, and if he didn't find it, to run so fast that she couldn't aim at him. She then ordered Gwynek to run in zigzags, not in a straight line, to prevent the other person from predicting his movements. She advised him to use tension to lift his body, to put force into changing his direction. "Try not to get wounded, because just one hit will make you helpless," the girl shouted at him. Because if he was going to get wounded, he needed to get it in a way that would not be critical. Preventing loss of mobility? That's the same as immortals, the guy thought. Training with both coaches taught him that the fighting styles of immortals and shapers are adapted to their characteristics. And Gwynek started running even faster, and continued to think that neither of them had taught him how to fight. The guy fell to his knees and froze for some reason. Then he got up and started running again, panting heavily. He kept thinking that it was these two coaches who taught him how to survive, in any situation he might find himself in. Immortals need to beware of weapons like knives, which can cause painful and serious wounds. As for rifles, the shotgun was more dangerous than the usual rifle. On the other hand, shapeshifters are more excited about those who attack them with a knife. This meant that all they had to do was to turn and strike. The reflexes and strength of the shapeshifter allowed them to react in this way, but the shotgun was the best for them because its range was short, but if you got too close to it, the game was over, and so they could only move away so that they could not be hit, because shapeshifters cannot regenerate, so their movements were designed to avoid getting hit. Dozens of bullets from the trainer's gun were lying on the floor of the gym. Gvanek sat down tiredly and tried to catch his breath when the coach came up to him and told him that the training was over. He looked around and wondered how they were going to clean up. The girl ordered him to get up and run through the wire, and Gvanek picked up the barbell like he did last time and thought that physical fitness was better than doing some senseless injuries. When he put his foot on the wire, he felt something strange, as if there was some kind of crazy monster behind him. He became scared, but concentrating, he walked along the wire. All along the way, he felt scared and scared. He kept looking around and didn't see anyone around him. The presence of someone could be felt in his skin. Finally, he reached the trainer, who was looking at something on the tablet again. The girl looked at him with a serious face and asked, "Did he feel it?" The boy looked at her as if numb with fear. "What was that?" he asked. "It's called wild bloodlust, and I can see that you could feel it," the coach replied. "Don't do that again. I thought my heart was going to break into pieces. I didn't like it one bit," Gwenki shouted at her, to which she replied that it's normal when you get used to it. "You know, if you have a similar situation, it will be easier for you," she explained. "So, keep training," she ordered. And so the shapeshifter began his training. But strangely enough, after 2 days, Gvank stopped falling to the ground when he ran along the wire, and he finally figured out how to resist the teacher's bloodlust. Thanks to his sharpened immortal senses, he was able to pick up the sensation of bloodthirst with his 5 senses and use his 6th sense to deal with it. If you bend your lower abdomen and keep it that way, you can handle it, he thought, as he ran with the barbell along the wire. As he ran skillfully, the teacher watched him with interest from a distance. She was silent. His classes continued to alternate between the shapeshifter and the immortal, but training with an immortal teacher was hellish for him. Because, in addition to organ regeneration, he had to train with axes, arrows, and spears. And even with traps, his immortal teacher did not spare him anything. For him, the more ferocious the weapon, the better the training result. The teacher explained that you have to be careful with traps, because as soon as you step on them, they start to cause terrible pain, and because of this, the brain will not work at full capacity. So the most dangerous weapon is the one that can cause permanent pain, not short-term pain. Gvank asked him again. Usually, immortals fight by simply getting injured, the teacher explained to him. That's why you have to get used to pain, because pain slows down logical thinking. A little later, the immortal teacher ordered him to take his poison. Training with the shapeshifter teacher was also not easy. The guy trained using loads on belts and vests. At the same time, he was adding weight with sandbags on his wrists and legs. The young man continued to train to dodge bullets and walk on wire, and at other times, he trained his body with dumbbells and a barbell. He was beginning to settle into his new life. His family also underwent small changes. In the midst of training, his father left for a business trip, and the boy witnessed his parents saying goodbye to each other, looking like teenagers. His mother was crying and couldn't let go of his father, constantly asking how they would see each other. And the father, laughing, reassured her that they would see each other every day. Gvank stood looking at them and rolled his eyes, thinking that it was as if they were going to be separated for several years. The immortal teacher, in addition to the holes all over the boy's body, also taught Gvank how to use conventional weapons and martial arts. One day, the teacher told the boy that he would quickly learn how to use a weapon, and with those words, it all started. But this did not mean that it was too difficult for Gvank. Probably because his body was a shapeshifter and his reflexes were those of an immortal, he learned everything very quickly as if playing. At the same time, the teacher taught Gvank how to shoot with all kinds of weapons, giving him models, which she had a collection of. One day, the trainer suggested that he also learn martial arts, which would also be useful to him in life, and promised to show him some video lessons, adding that learning to shoot from a weapon was quite difficult because it required the use of the senses. She wished she knew the truth about the guy and what he was doing outside of the gym. But the boy was unusual and had mixed blood with the special 5 senses of immortals. So he mastered the weapon quite easily, which surprised the girl. 2 months passed in such frantic training, and time flew by for Gvank. One day, the boy returned from the gym, and his father slyly asked if he had been there. The parents both looked at the boy, and the father said that he was very strong, even though he was his son. They started arguing. His mother said that Gvank was taking after his father, and he replied that their son was as smart as his mother. Gvank admired them and their relationship, and wondered why he didn't have a younger brother yet. The boy went into the bathroom and undressed. He began to carefully examine his body in the mirror, admiring the results of his training. And at that moment, he thought, why doesn't he have a girlfriend yet? His standards weren't that high. He just wanted someone pretty and mature, but at the same time someone alluring, and she should be able to cook, ideally have the same preferences as him. He would like her to look good, especially in jeans, and she should be smart and know what she wanted to do. This is the image of his girlfriend that Gvank came up with. Suddenly, his mother's phone rang. She answered the phone briefly and told Gwank that she was going to see Hemming's mother, thinking that her friend must be stressed because her child was a high school graduate. Well, it's quite a difficult time for a child, her son smiled. Gvanek was left alone, sitting and thinking about something. He didn't notice his mother come out, so he decided to take a shower. After washing, he shouted to his mother where his hairdryer was, but no one answered him. Now his phone rang, and he opened the message with interest and began to read that tomorrow was the exam. This meant that not much time had passed since the last big exam, but the boy felt quite strange. His mother had written to him, saying that the testing center was in Yoido and that he shouldn't be late. Gvanek recalled his meeting with his friends and when he told them that he would not be entering the university. The guys were very surprised by this decision and thought it was arrogant, and one of them asked to see his grades. Under their chatter, the boy thought that he did not consider it a shame, but he did not use his good grades and was never going to go to college. His path was already set 9 years ago when a black hole called the Hughes Gate opened. On that day, little Gvanek was trapped in the chaos by the rubble of a collapsed house. It was then that he saw someone who was fighting endless invaders, and it was then that he decided he wanted to be just like him. Gwanka sat and thought that his mother would definitely be upset if she knew the truth, because she had said the day he woke up that she wanted him to have a normal life. In the meantime, his mother went outside to meet someone, and someone called out to her. It was Coach Gwanika, and she asked her what excuse she had for leaving. I told her I had to meet the mother of one of my students who lives in the neighborhood. They went to a local cafe and ordered a cola and some food. Sitting down in front of a beautiful panoramic window, the coach finally asked her if she wasn't interested in how her son was doing, because she had never asked her about it. The mother replied that she only wanted him to do well for a half-breed, because his mixed blood of a shapeshifter and a human usually doesn't have half the abilities of a shapeshifter. So she couldn't ask him about it because she was so worried about him. And at that moment, in another city, Gvanek's father's phone rang. The man picked up the phone, and after listening for a minute, asked if it was serious. He exploded and started screaming that they could throw him into the ocean with his arms and legs cut off. But the caller asked him if he really didn't know anything, because he thought that Gvanek's father hadn't called him, because he must have known everything already. "What are you talking about?" the father asked. The caller replied, "It's not a standard call." The father could not believe what he was hearing. Meanwhile, the girls continued their conversation. Gvanek's mother said that her son didn't have to be good or outstanding. She just wanted him to be able to stand up for himself, for example, against groups of crazy scientists or something like that. The coach replied that there was a group recently that tried to combine different special species to create something that would surpass the strength of purebreds. They were the irregulars, but they failed and only managed to create grotesque monsters that had the power of both parents, the trainer explained. Gwyneka's mother told her that there was only one conclusion here. If you are immortal or a shapeshifter or a superhuman or something else, and you have children with a human, it will weaken the blood of your special species. You're lucky. The trainer laughed. "What do you mean?" asked her mother. "You just hit the jackpot in the form of your son," the trainer explained to her, hinting at their origins. Meanwhile, the father continued a nervous conversation on the phone and asked if his son was weaker than a quarter of his strength, because he thought that he was at least half his strength, because his family tree was very strong. The caller told him that it was the opposite, that the boy was very talented, and he had never seen such abilities, and taught him how to even hide his energy. The father was surprised by what he heard. At this time, the girls were also discussing Gvanek. His trainer said that his bloodline was very strong, and he had a very good mind. The boy's mother was surprised by this characterization. "He is very talented, and has even learned to have a wild thirst for blood," she exclaimed. Gvanek's mother was numb from what she heard. At that moment, the father told the caller that if he was lying to please him, he would bury him for 2 weeks. At that moment, Gwyneth's mother told the coach that she would be very angry if she joked with her like that. "I say it's absolutely true your son is incredibly talented," said the caller, who turned out to be Gavin's immortal teacher. The coach laughed at the woman's words and reiterated that her son was a true genius. Being in different places of the city, both parents said the same phrase at that moment, as expected from my son. Gwank woke up and came into the kitchen to greet his mother. After wiping his eyes, he asked her who was preparing breakfast. Where was their father? The woman replied that his father had already left for work and told the boy to wash his face and sit down to eat. Gvanek looked at the table, which was covered with plates full of food, and asked in surprise what the buffet was for. His mother looked at him in surprise and replied that today was an important day. Indeed, it was the day of the civil service exam. His mother explained to him that his brain would need glucose, which has a sweet taste and dissolves well in water and gives the body energy. Therefore, Gvanek had to eat well, but not too much, because if he ate too much, he would be sleepy or nauseous, and that would be a big problem for him. Gwank listened to her and thought that only his training was focused on survival and not on brain activity. The boy ate and thanked his mother. She asked him if he was ready for the exam. He answered that he was so ready that even in his dreams, he remembered everything he had learned, recalling how in his dreams, his legs were beaten and his organs were pierced. His mother looked at him sadly and said that if he did not pass this exam, their father would be very disappointed. Gvanek looked at her and noticed that she was very upset, and she clearly did not like the idea of him becoming a civil servant. But she still did not want him to fail this exam. She wanted to support him at the same time, but she was still very worried about him. The boy smiled at her and asked her not to worry too much about him, thinking that he was still immortal. In response, his mother promised him to fight him in the boxing ring if he failed this exam. The woman cheered up and asked him once again to try to pass the exam, and Gvank swore to her that everything would be fine. He went and called the elevator and decided to put on his headphones because music was the best thing to help him with his nerves. Suddenly he remembered that he had the thrill of being an immortal, and he began to sing loudly, and he was good at it, as if he had practiced it. When he got to the 30th floor, on the words, "That's how much I love you," the door opened, and he saw a pretty girl who also called the elevator. The guy coughed, and she smiled and looked up from her smartphone. Gvanek felt hot and flushed red. The girl laughed and said that when he proposed to her, she would like him not to sing, because someone so beautiful doesn't have to be able to sing. Gwank knew her. She was his neighbor Kang Hae-min. She got into the elevator, and Gwank asked her why she was interested in it at all. The girl slyly asked him if he wasn't planning to confess his love to her. The guy said he wasn't going to. "Why?" she asked in surprise. Gvank sharply replied that he had talked about his type of girl 100 times. She took him by the arm and scolded him that such beauties with a good figure and a mind were hard to find, and giggled. The elevator reached the first floor and Gvank got out, telling her not to say such things on the street. Or had she forgotten the world they lived in? Or did she want to give him a gift in the form of 2 metal bracelets? She forgot to add greed to the brains, and he got out of the elevator. The girl ran after him. The guy was crossing the street, and she was running after him, yelling at him to wait. The guy coldly told her not to follow him. But she continued to follow him, so they came to the Adwila building, which was a comprehensive education company founded in 2002 by Yang Hyun-nam. The girl asked him where he was going. Gwank replied that he was going to take the civil servant exam. He menacingly ordered her to return to school. She snapped back that she was already in her senior year and would be entering university next year. Gvanek congratulated her sharply and told her not to waste her life on parties and drinking when she received her passport. She replied that she was currently studying at a women's school, but would choose a regular university where a pack of rabid wolves could attack such a beauty. The girl was giving it her all. Gvanek hissed at her to take care of her education first, because her mother would soon go crazy with her. At that moment, Gvanek's bus approached, and he walked toward it. The girl shouted back at him that they could start dating, and he would help her with her studies, because it's really cool when your boyfriend is good at school. Without turning around, Gvanek told her not to shout like that, and not to scare his future wife, and went into the bus. The girl got angry and cursed. Sitting on the bus, Gvanek remembered how this little lady hadn't changed at all, and how she used to rush to the boys in all situations to fight. And he smiled. That was her special greeting. After about 10 minutes, his bus stopped at the stop he needed. It was a multi-story building where everyone was taking the general civil service exam. The guy walked into the lobby and looked at his watch. It was 7:50 in the morning, and the exam was scheduled for 9. He was too early. Gvanek shook his head and couldn't figure out where to go. He walked up to the reception desk where 2 girls were standing and said hello. One of them asked him why he was here so early. The carpenter explained that today they were taking an exam for special employment, and suddenly a man in a suit came up to them and asked if he was taking it too. The man was stout, about 45 years old, and had stern features. He looked at the boy carefully and suspiciously. Then he asked Gvanek to show him his statement. The boy could sense his distrust of him. He checked his application, introduced himself as Yu Kwang-ik, and told him to go up to the 9th floor. Gwangik took the elevator and entered a spacious room where he was greeted by a girl with bright hair. The guy asked her uncertainly if he had the wrong classroom, and she asked him to show her his application again if he was there for the exam. After carefully rereading everything, the girl confirmed that everything was correct. She directed him to walk forward until he saw a door at the end of the corridor. Gwyneth thought that everything was very complicated, probably because the exam is taken by immortals. He found the right door with a sign on it saying that it was the place for the special employment exam. The guy read it and thought, is the soundproofing there good? He thought there would be a lot of blood and noise, and he was surprised that such an exam was held in the very center of the city. Is this what the power of the world government looks like? The guy gathered all his courage, because he was visibly nervous. But he thought he had to get himself together because if he opened the door, knives might fly at him, and maybe if he turned away from them, that would be the condition for getting into the exam. His mind was racing with all sorts of thoughts. He opened the door a little with the thought that he was sure that he would suffer the same torment as he had during training. But the auditorium was completely empty of people. There were only ordinary chairs and tables, and the guy began to doubt his guesses. At the main table sat a bald man who told him that he was the first. The carpenter looked at his baldness in surprise. He ordered the man to show his application for verification. The carpenter silently handed it over, thinking that a long time ago they had invented a baldness remedy from materials found in a white hole, and although it had side effects, there were cheaper options. Or maybe it's a fashion for baldness. He couldn't calm down. He felt funny for some reason. The man asked for his ID card. Gavanik handed it over, thinking that he was probably being taken for a clown. Your number is 48. Please go to that table, the man said after checking the documents. The guy looked at him in surprise and thought again that he had imagined everything wrong because there were no tables or chairs at his training sessions. He sat down at the table in silence, guessing that this bald man could have attacked him with a knife. But he decided to keep his guard up anyway because everything was quite strange and unexpected. We have to be prepared for any turn of events, Gwank decided firmly and sat quietly watching. After a while, the classroom was filled with other applicants, and the time was approaching 9 in the morning. Everyone around him had books and notebooks out and was reading. Fanik was sitting there, and seeing all this, he started to panic. He felt stupid because he hadn't read any notes or books. The man suddenly asked who hadn't brought pens for the exam yet. Looking at Gavanik, he realized that he was sitting without anything and at an empty table. The bald uncle's face looked as if he was asking Gavanik who he was. But the boy began to recall the turmoil of preparing for this exam, how his mother had asked him to prepare for it, and how hellish the training was for him. He remembered the hateful sharp daggers that cut his legs to the blood and bone, the terrible collar that strangled him to unconsciousness, and how he had made a decision during those trainings that he would give his best on the exam. Fanik remembered the terrible pain when the immortal teacher first wounded him in the stomach. But no matter what, he was not going to give up. He sat in thought and shock for 50 minutes. Suddenly, the examiner announced that the exam would start in 10 minutes. Gvank felt that something had gone wrong. He finally heard the teacher's question about who hadn't brought pens, and he remembered that he had come empty-handed. He approached the teacher and took the pen. Looking at it with a surprised look, he thought that it looked like an ordinary marker, and perhaps this exam would really be written. Gavanik looked at everyone in the classroom and thought that everything looked like a final exam, with everyone around him reading and repeating something. Looking at the girls, he noticed that all of them had very unusual looks. And looking at the boys, he thought that with such appearance, they could be sent to idols. He looked to his right and saw his neighbor, the guy who caught his eye the most. The boy was sitting and reading a book attentively, and had a very good appearance and a nice body. Looking at him, the carpenter noticed that his hands were very good and that he would probably be the best for advertising. Behind him, he noticed a strange light, but the guy continued to read carefully without distraction. The light was quite bright and shone on half of his head. Gvanik looked at it openly. He could not understand what it was. Suddenly, another man entered the room, the same man who had checked Gvanik's application at the reception desk, and the audience immediately fell silent. And something strange began to happen. The examiners began to put huge screens between the tables of applicants, separating them. Each of them was now completely isolated from each other by 4 walls. Gvank sat there and wondered if they had decided to put up screens for hypersensitive immortals. That's why there was such a large distance between the tables, and they would probably be handing out exam papers now. He stood up and began to look through the screen, thinking that he was probably not late to take the exam paper. And at that moment, the examiner came to him and said that his number was wrong. He was now the 50th, and ordered him to move to another table. The guy thought that if it were a different exam, he would not have been in such a hurry to attend it either. For some reason, he was sure that the exam would be easy for him, until he started reading the exam paper and realized that he was wrong. The guy grabbed his head from what he read. It was easier for him to run around with daggers than all this. He could hear everyone in the classroom whispering that it was too complicated. Vanek gathered his strength and began to read the sheets carefully, rounding his eyes each time. The exam paper contained tests, with descriptions of situations that could happen and answers. Vanek quickly skimmed through the questions and thought, I don't understand why everyone around me is whining. What's so hard about this if the answer was obvious and it was the fourth option? He reread the question again about what to do if he was wounded and began to think that the wound was not big enough and therefore it was better to choose to stop the bleeding, and he checked the box. The guy remembered training with an immortal teacher who told him that the first thing to do was to stop the bleeding. Otherwise, he would go into shock, then he would need to perform hemostasis and only then find shelter. That's exactly what he told him. Though it took Vanek a couple of runs on sharp daggers to realize it, the answer was obvious. By stopping the bleeding, a small wound would not pose a great threat. The next question was how much blood loss could lead to shock. He recalled how his teacher could not understand why. When he stabbed him in the stomach and there was a large blood loss, the boy did not go into shock and shouted that he did not understand the reason. Then the teacher told him that immortals are similar to humans at the core, and therefore the answer was obvious to Vanek. It was option 3. The boy read on, and was asked what to do if you can't dodge a knife. He thought that it was better to put his hand out, because he had heard about the importance of mobile strength, and he answered with the number 1 answer, recalling a movie he had watched a long time ago. It told the story of a man from a poor neighborhood who took part in a quiz. A large sum of money was at stake, and so the participant guessed the answers based on his life experience. The exam questions were indeed quite difficult, but surprisingly interesting. Most likely, this exam was designed for applicants who have life experience in such situations, because only having the body of an immortal fashion was it possible to go through such tests. Vanek assessed his level of knowledge as if he had been hanging out in hell. It really turned out that the advice given by the immortal teacher and the skills he had learned from him helped him to identify the correct answers. After a while, the exam paper was filled with answers. Vanek looked at it and came to the conclusion that his hard strength training was the real learning. He turned the sheet over and saw that there was another question on the back, namely, how to kill an immortal and an empty answer field, which meant that the applicant had to write his own answer. The boy read the question again and thought the answer was quite obvious. He stuck his head over the screen and told the bald examiner that he was done and asked how much time was left. The bald examiner looked at him and thought that the boy had given up, but he loudly announced that those who had finished could leave the classroom, leaving their exam papers on the table. Vanek got ready and went out into the corridor. There he saw the girl from the carriage he had met at the entrance. Her name was Nuna. She asked him if he had read what was written on the first page of questions, and she smiled. The guy nodded, and she continued to say that he needed to sign his consent and gave him a tablet. Vanek silently put his electronic signature. At the same time, Nuna monotonously told him about the norms of the law on the protection of personal information. She smiled very sweetly at him and asked if he was really a half-breed. Vanek confirmed that it was a type of collaboration between a werewolf and an immortal. Nuna sincerely told him that she would hope for his success. She liked the guy. Vanek also thanked her quite nicely, thinking that he had been given the green light. The day was coming to an end, and the windows in the building where the exam was being given were lit up. The bald examiner was sitting and checking the papers. He came to Vanek's work, and after a minute, he grabbed his head in surprise. He was reading the boy's answer to the last question, which asked about the methods of killing an immortal, and he started muttering in amazement. Vanek had mentioned 4 methods: strangulation, freezing, dismemberment, and burning, all of which were really dangerous for an immortal and could lead to unconsciousness as a result of blocked airways. This also applied to the method of freezing with liquid nitrogen. Burning in the fire was also a valid method because burns of the whole body lead to the immortal's activity stopping. Dismemberment was also suitable because in such a situation, regeneration was impossible. The man read and thought that there were endless ways to kill an immortal, which meant that there was no specific answer. Most immortals have an aversion to safety, so you have to take into account all deadly weapons and all situations. The meaning of the last question was that the body of an immortal could regenerate, but it was still possible to die. If you know all the reasons that can lead to death, you can reduce the likelihood of it happening. The bald examiner began to carefully study Gvanek's questionnaire, remembering that he had heard that the boy was born of a human and an immortal, so his physical abilities might be low, but that meant he had a good mind. After checking the test, he had to identify and evaluate his first impression of the boy and describe him accordingly. He recalled his image and noted that he didn't look like an immortal, didn't bring a pen to the exam, came a full hour early, and sat staring at one point and left early. With a sigh, the man began to describe him. 2 weeks passed and Gvanek's phone rang. He picked it up and had a short conversation with someone. After hanging up, he happily told his mother, who was cooking as usual, that he had passed the exam. The woman happily replied that this was good news. "But I didn't just pass it," Gvanek told her and showed her the phone screen. She could not understand what he meant. On the screen of the phone was a message from the university, which said that Gvanek had won first place in the written exam for civil servants. First place? My mother's eyes rounded, and she rushed to call my father. She shouted into the phone that their son had won first place, and they decided to celebrate with a festive dinner and cooked top-quality veal. Gvanek heard about the delicious meal and slyly asked his mother if he could unbuckle his pants today. His mother laughed and told him to wear pants with an elastic band. An hour later, his father returned to their apartment. Gvanek happily opened the door and greeted him. He was holding 2 bags of groceries, from which packages of veal were peeking out. Gvanek looked at the packages and thought that his favorite meat had finally arrived. His father noticed his look and laughed and told him to at least pretend to look at him. After about 20 minutes, a strange and fabulous aroma of roasted meat spread through the apartment. The family was celebrating their adult son's first victory, and everyone was really happy about this news. The parents were overjoyed and chattering among themselves. The father told Gvanek that he had no doubts about his abilities. The boy replied that now it was clear whose son he was, to which his mother laughed and added that of course he was theirs. They started asking him what exactly happened at the exam, and the boy said that the questions were much easier than he thought. At that moment, he remembered his immortal teacher and thought that he was really very cool. His father told them that if the results were in, they would have an interview soon, which meant that the admission process was over. The mother asked her husband a little anxiously what department their son would go to now. He replied that he did not know for sure, but he would probably start at a state enterprise under the Ministry of Administrative Security. Gvanek had stuffed his mouth full of meat and could not chew it quickly, and he blinked in surprise. It seemed to him that his father had somehow deviated from a direct answer, although he was behaving as usual. His mother handed him another piece of meat without noticing. The boy chewed and wondered why the government and Old Force chose immortals, and what do they do with immortal civil servants. He had a lot of questions, but he realized that no one would answer them. His father noticed his thoughtfulness and asked what was wrong with him. Sometime after passing the exam, he received a message about the date of the interview, which was to take place in the same building. The guy wore an elegant business suit, a white shirt, and tie. He remembered that his father had never given him any advice about the interview, so he asked him again, and he said he didn't know anything. He just had to show his personality and answer clearly and concisely. Well, it can't be helped, so the stronger man will win, thought Gvanek. His mother, who was standing behind him and admiring him, called out to him. She wished her son good luck with tears in her eyes. Gvanek looked at himself in the mirror and was pleased with himself. He smiled and thanked her. He left the apartment and called the elevator. While the elevator was riding, the guy looked at himself in the mirror. He thought that he could go into show business looking like this. Suddenly, he heard a familiar girl's voice behind him. "Why are you staring in the mirror? Are you admiring yourself?" It was his neighbor again. The guy hissed that they had been seeing each other a lot lately. Maybe she was stalking him. "I was just passing by," the girl replied, twirling the bag in her hands. "You should have sat down and read a book instead of wandering around," the boy snapped at her. "When you become my tutor, then you'll have the right to swing," she threw back angrily. "I'm busy." Gvanek cut her off. "By the way, that suit looks good on you," the girl exclaimed and laughed. "I know it," Gvanek shouted with satisfaction without turning around, and so they talked as usual. Gvanek came to the exam center again, and it was full of students, each of whom was sitting on his gadget and reading desperately. The guy looked at them and thought that everyone was trying so hard. Looking at all the applicants, Gvanek saw a guy he knew sitting next to him at the exam and glowing. He was sitting with his arms folded across his chest and his eyes closed. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and looked at him strangely. The guy felt uncomfortable and thought he couldn't understand why he was acting like that, so he decided to sit away from him just in case. The corridor was packed with people. Everyone was sitting quietly and waiting. Suddenly, the door opened, and a stranger came out and called Gvanek's number 48 and name, and the guy responded. He was invited to enter the classroom. When he entered, he saw two people, a man and a woman with bright hair. The man had a straight red head and eyebrows. Gvanek looked at him and thought that his skin was too white and his hair was too fiery, so he came up with the call sign Candle. A girl sat next to him. Her face was familiar to the boy. She smiled and said they already knew each other. It was Nuna, the one who had met him at the exam, and now it turned out that the girl was on the jury. Vanik sat down on a chair across from their table and was asked the first question: what made him apply to their company? The guy began to think chaotically about what to answer, because if he told the truth that his father had forced him to, he would be thrown out of there with a whistle. And he blurted out that he was interested in finding out his capabilities in such a difficult exam. And also to fulfill his dream, he added loudly. Which dream? The man asked him again. I want to fight for our people and homeland, the boy added. The red-headed man raised his eyebrows and asked what sacrifices Gvanek was willing to make for his comrade in battle. Gvanek replied that it all depends on the situation. So, you mean you won't sacrifice anything? The man asked him again. That's not quite true. I'll just find an effective way out of a difficult situation, Gvanek replied, thinking that it sounded a bit defiant. Then they started asking other questions. Nuna formed a situation, for example. His mother and girlfriend were drowning in the water. Who would he save first? Gvanek replied confidently that he thought he could save both of them because he was a good swimmer. Then the red-haired man asked his own question, namely, if there was only one bullet left and two targets, what would he do? The guy answered that he would shoot one and immobilize the other by hitting him with his gun. At that moment, Nuna imagined how epic it would look. After a while, the interview ended. The guy confidently answered all the questions and returned home with a calm soul. A few days passed, and Gvanek spent all this time playing games on his phone. One morning, his mother came into his room. It was 10 o'clock, and her son was still sleeping. She was surprised to hear that he had been idle since the interview, and asked him if he had any plans for the day. He sleepily replied that he did, in fact, have plans. The woman reminded him what would happen if he failed the exam. Vanik was surprised to hear that he would have a boxing sparring match with her, and at the end of it, there would be bloodshed. And what were your plans? She asked him again. With myself, her son answered. He went on to explain that he just wanted to eat, sleep, and have fun. The mother's face changed, and she clenched her fist at what she heard. Seeing such a reaction, the boy suddenly thought that he urgently wanted to do something else, like go to the mountains. His mother dryly ordered him to leave the room and talk. Without arguing, the boy quickly dressed and sat down across from her to talk. She said in a mysterious way that he should be careful at the university. Vanik could not understand what she meant. The woman explained that the instincts of werewolves are dangerous, and if they get the better of him, there could be trouble. What kind of trouble? Asked her son. The mother explained that most often it was beatings and rape. The boy listened numbly. She continued to say that once there was a legend about a werewolf who howled at the full moon. Once upon a time, a werewolf could not control his instincts and began to howl at the moon, and that night was a full moon. So if you can't control your own desires, you should go out and scream. It will make you feel better, his mother advised him. But if you believe the news, it's the magicians and superhumans who cause the most problems. And besides, I've never heard of anyone howling late at night, her son replied. But there is a way to defeat your desires, she said. It is self-control. Gvanek smiled ironically at her and recalled how his mother used to take him to the mountains after waking up, and obviously it was a kind of training. The second way is to relieve tension, and then the remaining energy can be spent on training, she said loudly with instruction. That's why I told you to find a girlfriend, otherwise you'll always be a womanizer, said Gvanek's mother to the blushing Gvanek. Although you were born with a high probability of doing something, she added, and the boy bent his head guiltily. Hey, maybe you like guys and I just didn't know? She asked. Gvanek screamed out in fright. No, You have to live with everyone for a month during orientation training. What kind of company is this? The woman questioned him. I think you've probably been accepted, so maybe you can do what you really want to do before you're assigned to a position? She asked the surprised Gvanik, and the guy remembered how at the interview he was congratulated on his final pass and given the documents, namely, the instructions for successful candidates of Varim. The guy started reading it, and was surprised to see that it mentioned a 5-week internship with joint residence. He did not understand what they would teach there and what kind of joint residence was it. His eyes grew bigger and bigger with each point. He was surprised to read that the trainee's annual salary would be 65 million won. The company would cover all physical training costs, pay bonuses, cover cultural and entertainment events, and provide a workplace and an apartment nearby after the internship was over. There were a whole bunch of privileges. It seemed that with each point, they were getting bigger and bigger, and the trainee would be exempt from military service after 18 months of work. The guy read in disbelief. It was some crazy company with a dream job. Nuna was looking at him the whole time and asked him with a smile if he had any more questions. Can I show these documents to my parents? Gwank asked her. And tell me, is your father an immortal? She asked, and Gwynnett confirmed. She added with a smile that if he wanted to see his mother behind bars for the rest of his life, he should tell her everything, because it would be an incredible memory. She talked about terrible things with a smile. That is why Hvanik did not tell his mother anything. He decided to melt his mother's heart by saying that her son wanted to try to become the head of a state corporation that was part of the Ministry of Administrative Security, and when he returned home, he told her. The mother was surprised to hear him say that she believed that young people who have a bright future ahead of them and who will run the country should have similar intentions. Vanik thought that he just wanted to try to work for a company that recognized his talent, not for money, and an apartment. He was being disingenuous. You speak well, his mother told him, to which Gvanik replied that wasn't it all, thanks to his smart father and beautiful mother, thinking that his mixed blood also played a significant role. I'm glad you're my son. Judging by the way your little phrases don't make me mad, his mom melted. I wish there was a child like you among the werewolves, she said, looking at her son carefully. It's okay, Mom, really. Gwynnett smiled at her. I think that I have a good mix of two bloods. Werewolves have instincts that are difficult to control, and immortals have keen senses. The instincts of the former can manifest themselves in a very acute form, and among the latter, there are especially sensitive ones. He did not consider himself to be either of them, and I can handle my instincts perfectly thanks to the internet, Gvank thought, because he was still young. And as for the high sensitivity of immortals, he was perfectly able to sleep anywhere and eat anything, he thought, as he went to bed. When morning came, Gvanik was determined not to worry about anything, and he received a message about where the training would be held. He was absolutely sure that wherever he went and whatever he did, he would be there. He had complete confidence in his abilities. Gvanik stood with his suitcase and looked at the bus, which was already approaching him. It was already afternoon, and the sun was at its zenith. The people at the bus stop seemed to be melting from the heat. Gvank finally got on the bus and sat down in a comfortable seat by the window. Summer, hot summer, he thought. The bus was new and comfortable, with comfortable seats and several air conditioners that made the air comfortable, not like the people who were roasting in the sun at the bus stop. Only immortals were sitting in it, and it was half empty. Everyone was looking forward to the trip to the trainee orientation. Gwynnett got on the bus and looked at everyone again. At first glance, he could tell who was a purebred and who was a half-breed. The purebloods were easy to recognize. They had a specific appearance that caught the eye, and their aura was completely different. Gwynnett could feel it, using his 5 senses and his extraordinary intuition. He was sitting in the seat, and across the aisle from him was the guy next to him on the exam. Gvanik looked at him again and thought. The guy swore to himself that he would sit next to him again, because there were no other seats available. He began to listen, and everyone on the bus began to get to know each other, telling who was a half-breed and who was not, and someone offered to eat. The acquaintance was in full swing. Gvank was listening to all this, and remembered his conversation with his father, who told him to try to make more friends, and not to judge people by their clothes, because it often happens that someone you don't like is a good person, and vice versa. Then the father lovingly patted him on the head, and told him that his son had grown a lot, and was much taller than him. The father laughed and replied that it was not about height, and asked how Gvanik slept. The boy replied that he was fine, to which his father said that he had a big problem with that at his age. Gvanek asked why, and his father told him that he had total insomnia because the sounds coming from the neighboring house kept him awake. How did you solve this problem? You can't stay awake all the time, the boy said, thinking that werewolves restrain their instincts with self-control, and he didn't understand how immortals cope with their high sensitivity. His father went on to say that he used earplugs, put on a sleeping mask, covered himself with a microfiber blanket, and none of this helped him. And then he bought a 4-story building and made a room in the center and walled himself in with soundproof walls. Is this really an option? And what are poor people supposed to do? His son asked. His father didn't seem to hear the question and continued to say that if you continue to fight insomnia and lead a social life, eventually you find a way to control your feelings and it becomes easier. Well, there was one more option. You could go to the mountains to train for about 3 years. Gvanek listened to him in amazement and thought that his father had such a hard time controlling his feelings, and he could do it as easily as breathing. His father explained something else, that werewolves have a fine control of the muscles of the whole body, so the control of sensations is very similar. For example, when you perk up your ears or tense a part of your back, all the guys who will be with you will be like that. And they went home, where their mother was waiting for them. Suddenly, a stranger neighbor opened his eyes and said to Gvanek, "Hi." He looked at him in surprise and blurted out that this was the 3rd time. The neighbor's face showed that he did not understand what he was talking about. Gvanek explained that this was the 3rd time they had seen each other. "Do you know me?" Gvanek thought in surprise. At this point, the neighbor also thought that they had actually met twice and had exchanged glances. Gvanek told him that they had met at the test, at the interview, and now. The neighbor told him that this was the first time he had ever seen him. Gvanek angrily said to his father that it was not only the first impression, but after the 2nd dialogue, everything was clear. The memory of this prince was clear to him. Mentally, he called him a shameless mug. He was very annoying. Mentally, he sent the prince away and looked back and saw a girl. He decided to meet her, noting that she was also blonde, but did not look like a pureblood. He told her loudly that he was glad to meet her. The girl sat there indifferently and remained silent. "You're a pureblood or a half-breed. It's not quite clear from your appearance," Gvanek said to her, looking at her carefully. The girl looked at him and said that he was immortal on his father's side, his senses were dulled, he grew up in prosperity, not even knowing where they were being taken. He bought into the terms of the contract, am I right? "No, you're not. I have cosmic dreams about this company, you green-haired girl," Gwankey thought angrily. "And who are you?" asked her boyfriend. "And I'm pouring your observation skills at all?" The stranger scolded him. She went on to tell him in a monotone that immortals are very sensitive people, and the reason why everyone sat away from the windows was because of the sunlight coming through the curtains. And even talking now is a torment. I know this very well, because I am just as sensitive to the sun. Gvanek shouted to her that the half-breeds were quietly eating chips and making noise on the bus. But the girl was not one of the quiet ones and snapped at him, calling him a blind turkey and ordering him to shut up. Gvanek began to pound with anger. He was so angry that he wanted to forget the words about the politeness of his parents and punch her in the face. He folded his arms across his chest and for some reason remembered that his father had been called a thorn when he was in a relationship, and that was after he had awakened and learned to control his abilities. It seemed to him that this girl was really right, but that did not justify her rudeness. The boy looked at the whole bus again and decided that it was a real hearse on its way to the orientation. He continued to think that if he opened a packet of chips, he would be an enemy of the people, and it was a good thing he had a good breakfast. And in a moment he realized that he felt something unpleasant in his intestines. It was gas. His breakfast was too big, and the 2 liters of soy milk were probably too much, and his stomach started to turn. At that moment, he had a childlike, brilliant idea. He thought of letting out his gases and spoiling the air in the direction of the rude neighbor behind him. The smell spread quickly and she realized everything, covering her nose. She hissed that he was a real bastard. "My uncontrolled revenge is complete," Gwankey thought with a satisfied smile on his face. Several hours passed since the gas attack. Everyone on the bus suffered for a while, and finally the bus reached its destination. Everyone got off at the platform of a beautiful bus station and walked in the same direction, carrying their suitcases. They reached a certain neighborhood, and Gwanka thought that somewhere around here they must have found a hotel. Suddenly, someone called out to him from behind. "What did you eat this morning?" asked a boy with red hair, and his friend with green hair started laughing. Gavanik looked around and thought that these must be the same half-breeds from the end of the bus, and they had certainly become friends. The green-haired one introduced himself as Kim Johan and was 21 years old, and the red-haired one said he was Pan Guite and was 23. The boys used the words pan and gui, which means gases, in a joking way. Hyun, you should have farted then. I'm Yu Kwang-ik. I'm 20 years old, Gwang-yuk introduced himself. Speaking of age, it doesn't matter who's older or younger. You probably don't know anything, said the red-haired Hyun. Why is that? It's the company's orientation. In such a situation, we would call each other Mr. and Miss, Gwank replied. The boy began to stare into the distance and gasped in surprise that he saw something. Down in the valley, everyone saw a huge 4-story training center with training grounds buried in the greenery of the trees. The guys suddenly heard someone shouting to everyone to line up in 5 rows. Faster, someone shouted again, and all the applicants started running with their suitcases to the center. Gavunk looked at the crowd of people and thought that there must be 100 people here. A lot of people were selected. After running, everyone was standing there panting for breath. Gavanik looked and could not understand why everyone was dying. It was easy to run with a suitcase. Suddenly, one of the examiners in a military uniform wearing a cap and dark glasses appeared in front of the applicants. He was bald. Next to him stood an examiner with red hair, whom Gvanik called Candle and Nuna, who were also in uniform. The bald man began to speak loudly. He could be heard in all corners of the courtyard that from that day on, for a month, all applicants would have to work hard for their good abs. He went on to shout that they were all already disappointed in them because they had no stamina and as a result were short of breath. He then ordered everyone to turn their heads back, and everyone looked back together and saw the concrete treadmills. Do you see those 3 trees? Baldy asked loudly. Now everyone run to them. The first 15 people will be the winners. And the whole crowd instantly exploded and ran toward the target, knocking each other over on the way. Everyone was running, including the blonde and the prince from the bus and the green-haired and red-haired men. Gavanki was running very fast, but it was very easy for him. He thought that he didn't want to brag, but he could run even on one leg. This was probably because during his personal training, Gvanik had to go through many dangerous obstacles and was as calm as a boa constrictor. He decided to finish 14th, his new experience allowing him to quickly get used to this physical training. He remembered his conversation with his mother, where she had told him that he had to remember not to let anyone know that he was a werewolf. "And what will happen?" asked the son. "You'll get in trouble," said the mother. "What do you think a werewolf looks like to ordinary civilians?" she asked Gvanik. Gvanik expressed his opinion that werewolves are like a bomb that ever goes off. He's almost a criminal, a howling type, and just a walking threat. And he realized that there was no way he could be caught. He really finished 14th, thinking about it. The whole crowd was barely breathing. Gavunk stopped and thought that he was very tired of acting during this race. The instructor stood there and watched all the trainees who could barely drag their feet to the finish line, some of them running briskly, some limping, some even worse off. "This will not do. Go home. What are you going to do if you can't even pass the basic course?" The instructor was furious. The trainees all turned white with fear. "Do you think I'm wrong?" The instructor barked at everyone and looked at them with a believing look. "Everybody lie down on the ground and start doing push-ups." He decided to finish off all the trainees. They silently laid down in a rack and began to do push-ups. "When I count 1, you shout me I. When I count 2, you shout idiot," he commanded everyone. Vanek was surprised to think that they had a very interesting slogan, but he did push-ups in silence. It was very easy for him. While doing push-ups, Gvanik remembered that when he read stories of employees of large companies about their orientation, they all said that they played all kinds of games and started dating, and he thought that they would do the same. The guy was a little disappointed in his plans. "Are you crazy? Can't you get into the groove?" Nuna exclaimed irritably. "Thank you very much for your support," Gwynic thought. Everyone was doing push-ups actively and intensely to the beat set by Baldy. If you listened closely, you could hear everyone swearing with foul language. "Everyone, stop!" Lisi shouted loudly. "I didn't have this in my youth," he continued to say. Was he referring to the one who swore the most and barked that young people today swear right on the first day of training with an instructor? No, the guy who was doing push-ups and barely breathing shouted back. The bald man sat down next to him and began to speak even louder so that the half-breed wouldn't scream. Or maybe he wanted to tear the purebred's eardrums. Or maybe he had a problem with his head and planned to laugh at his comrades. The guy continued to do intense push-ups. The instructor walked around the rows and loudly told everyone that they shouldn't shout, they should speak quietly. This is the basis of the basics, and everyone should keep a stance. Gvank was doing push-ups with ease and thought that the immortals were really weak, and he needed to pretend more. Baldy straightened up and continued to talk to the unfortunate guy. In my time, people like you were immediately kicked out, but now the world has become a better place, so it gives you a choice. Then he sat down again and said that he would either leave or be punished. I'd rather get punished, the boy said. Won't you regret it? The instructor asked again. The boy nervously replied, No, not at all. Hvanek was doing push-ups and listening to their dialogue with interest. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound, like a crunch, and instantly thought that it sounded like a fracture. He became very curious and decided to take a closer look at what was happening. 2 instructors were standing next to that unfortunate guy, and one of them was covering his mouth. The guy was trying to scream in pain. The bald man said that he was ordered to close his mouth, but he could not hear him. What kind of generation is this? He could not calm down. The guy's face was already blue with pain. The guy was peeping and was shocked to think that the instructor was out of his mind. The guy broke his arm, and the instructor ordered him to be silent. And although this pain is tolerable, it still hurts too much to be silent. The bald man straightened up and loudly announced that if you break the rules, the punishment starts with a fracture. -1 point for foul language, -2 points for yelling, he continued to announce. Then he walked over to Gvanek and continued to say, -5 points for fighting without permission. All the last one is to be checked at the moment of punishment itself. Well, were you interested, cadet? The bald man standing behind Gvanek, who was doing push-ups, yelled. The cadet who was doing push-ups thought that he was not even once. With that, the bald man turned to the other instructor, repeating that this had never happened in his time. Then he ordered all the students to stand up, and the first 15 who arrived were no exception. Then the bald man announced to everyone that his name was Lee Chang-mo, and from that moment on, he was their instructor. All 3 instructors stood and looked sternly at the students. Nuna took a step ahead and continued to say that Lee Chang-mo would be in charge of basic endurance training because he has a close connection to the regenerative power of immortals. You're still just chickens, but you'll have to do the basics while working for the company, and honing your basics is the goal of your orientation. Gwanka stood there listening and thinking that if there are abnormals and normals among the instructors, Nuna belongs to the latter. She has a very pleasant voice and a calm voice. Nuna introduced herself as Pak Ta Ram, and she was a technique instructor. Gwank could not understand what techniques she was talking about. The 3 instructors fell silent again, and silence hung over the entire yard. Then the red-haired man spoke up, saying his name was Kim Han. And I will kill you, Kim Han growled menacingly. The crowd of applicants stood in silent shock. Suddenly, Nuna started to save the day and explained to everyone that they had misunderstood. Kim Han would tell them all in detail about how to control their bodies as an immortal. Gwangyuk listened to this and thought that something didn't seem right to him, because Kim Han's face said that he wanted to kill everyone. Does this company hire murderers as instructors? Lee Chang-mo exclaimed loudly that if someone wants to return to their mother, he doesn't mind, but on the contrary, he will be very happy if no one is left here. But Gwank was sure that he only had to stay here for a month, and then he would have a great life, as long as he didn't get shot in the head, although that was easy for immortals. Lee Chang-mo was looking at the courtyard, where none of the applicants had gone anywhere, and it was silent. After looking at them carefully and pausing, he announced to everyone that their choice had been made. Then I invite you all to hell, Lee Chang-mo exclaimed, and silently left. The applicants were ordered to enter the building where they would live, with 10 people in each room. Lee Chang-mo entered Gwanek's room and ordered everyone to put on their uniforms and wait. Gvanek sat on the bed and held the folded uniform in his hands. He looked around the shabby room, cursing to himself that they weren't on the set of a horror movie after all. He looked at the green-haired man and the redhead, and was even glad that they were in the room with him. Meanwhile, the guys were complaining to each other that their only desire was to take a shower. Then Gvank looked over at the prince and the blonde from the bus, who were sitting and unwrapping their uniforms, and thought bitterly that it would be better if they were not in the room. Then he looked to his right, and there was a guy sitting next to him who was very large in bulk. The carpenter could not stand it and asked him if he was having a hard time. The chubby guy replied, and Gwank thought that not all immortals are as thin as sticks. Then he noticed a guy in the room with him who looked Arab. They were called Mansour. On the next beds were two blondes, a boy and a girl. They looked very much alike, like brother and sister, and Gvanek quickly nicknamed them Poodle and Belyashka. The last one was a dark-haired girl who seemed a bit plain and unremarkable to Gvanek. By his count, there were 7 boys and 3 girls from the Ayog. He grumbled to himself that they could have made separate women's and men's rooms because there was nowhere to change, and then his eyes fell on the door where the words "changing room" were written in huge letters. Suddenly, the blonde from the bus hissed at him not to even think about peeking into the locker room, and Gvanek snapped back that he didn't need to. She looked at him with a look of absolute disbelief. The guy thought to himself that he hadn't even been discovered yet, and he was already considered a pathological criminal, and what was he going to do about it? A dark-haired, simple girl told everyone in the voice of a real gangster that in order for everyone to get along, they would have to follow many rules. And then a guy named Prince entered the dialogue and said that everyone would deal with physiological issues outside the room, and whoever broke the rules would be dead. Gvank jumped up at these words. The blonde girl raised her hand and shouted that she agreed. She was the girl who annoyed Gvanek the most. The green-haired one and the red-headed one also raised their hands and said they agreed. Gvanek looked at them in surprise as his friends of 2 hours just abandoned him, and all 9 people in the room said the word yes, one after another, then fell silent and looked at Gwynek. For some reason, the prince reminded everyone to brush their teeth because cleanliness is the basis of the basics for him. Again, everyone started shouting their ZA. Gvanek remained stubbornly silent, thinking that he was actually brushing them well. Listening to all these shouts, he thought in frustration, like it or not, the hamster will have to live with these people for a whole month. And since they were all in the same boat, he would have to join the company, and he raised his hand in agreement. After a while, they all went to the dining room. Gwanka ate and thought that the food was about 3 times as good as it could be, while he chewed and listened to everyone around him and came to the conclusion that there were 10 people in each room and that they were probably one team and their numbers must be the same as the numbers of the rooms, so there were 10 teams. Suddenly, one of the instructors announced that after the meal was over, they had to choose a leader in their team. This was already interesting to Gwenek. The blonde looked at the prince and suddenly told him to become the leader of their team. "You have the right blood," said the white boy. The red-haired Gwite Hyun suddenly said that he agreed. "I think he has a difficult personality. Aren't leaders open-minded people who unite other people?" Gwangyuk finally interjected. The blonde turned to him and began to say pompously that if Gwynek considered himself a leader, he was very much mistaken. The fact that the purity of the blood was undisputed, and therefore the right decision would be to ignore Gwynek's opinion, because the leader had already been determined. The table became very quiet. But Gwanek was not upset. He thought sarcastically that this lady would make a good patrolman if she were placed somewhere in the center of the 8th Kanama Highway. Do what you want, the guy thought mysteriously. Gwank thought there would be a training session in the afternoon, but it wasn't. They were given clothes, some strange boots, and some paraphernalia. With 100 people gathered in one pile for supplies, time flew by very quickly. Then everyone took a shower, had dinner, and night fell unnoticed. The instructor came in and announced that there would be a short lecture. The instructor sat down at the table and said that everyone probably knows the name of the company. "What is the name of the company?" Gvanek asked the green-haired man. He was surprised to hear that he didn't know. "I know I'm cool. Is that enough?" Gwanek sarcastically replied. Johan Hyun said that he must have a big problem with his head. The instructor told everyone that the purpose of the training was to select Hwarim officials. He explained to everyone that their company was supported by the government, but they were not civil servants, although they also worked for the government. At this point, Gwani thought that maybe his father was calling the test a civil servant to hide the truth from his mother. For this reason, the selection criteria have become very loose. In my time, you couldn't even dream of working in Varium if you couldn't dodge knives while running, the bald man said. How many times did he say that phrase today in my time? Gvankik thought irritably. That is, if you don't want to die, then strain your body and brains. My lecture is over. The instructor finally stopped talking. Then he muttered under his breath. But didn't he say enough? And everyone knows everything anyway. It was clear that he was too annoyed. Nuna began to save the situation. She said that Quarim has a clear goal, which is to help everyone present to use their immortal energy correctly. I hope you will remember my words, she said. Gwyneth thought about how to use the power properly. Everyone was told to get ready for bedtime. Vonik washed his face and got into bed. The crazy day was over, and he was still tired, and he expected his sleep to be like that of a baby. He still didn't fall asleep, but lay there listening to his 9 neighbors, struggling to get to sleep, some asking him not to breathe loudly, some asking him to be quiet, some threatening him for not moving. They are gentle creatures, Gwenki thought. His neighbor was a green-haired boy who snorted irritably at Gvanek to stop breathing so loudly and to leave the room. Am I going to die or what? Gvanki growled at him in surprise, but he remembered his father's words that it takes at least 3 years to get over your hypersensitivity, and the green-haired boy was 23 years old now, the oldest, and therefore most likely everyone's hypersensitivity had reached its peak. Gvank did not hold a grudge against his neighbor. He cleared it up, so he asked him how he lived if he could not sleep at all. The man replied that he would not be able to sleep tonight, so he would try the last resort. He pointed to his neck, hinting at strangulation. Because we believe that losing consciousness is also an option for this problem, because immortals cannot have any complications. You want me to put you to sleep? Gwyneth asked him again. Not everyone can knock an immortal out, the neighbor answered. If you overdo it, you can wake up in 2 days, the green-haired man explained. Suddenly, the red-haired boy noticed that Gvanek, saying sweet dreams, may you dream of me, began to strangle his friend. He cursed in fright. I'll be dead, the redhead exclaimed, as his friend lost consciousness before his eyes. The green-haired man passed out, and Gvanek gently laid him down on a pillow. The redhead asked if he was a sleeper. Guite, do you want to dream about me too? He asked the redhead, and also gave him a little squeeze. The guy fell asleep in a peaceful sleep. Everyone else in the room sat and watched Gwynek in amazement. Who else needs help? He asked everyone, realizing that none of them would fall asleep on their own. And he began to put them to bed one by one, as if they were in kindergarten. Gvank looked at the beds and thought that everything was great. Everyone had flown away to the kingdom of Morpheus. Only the prince and the princess remained, sitting and silently watching him. As they say, everyone has their own talent. Help me too, the blonde said quietly to Guanco. Why should I? The boy answered her. Why not? This is a practical question. We are roommates. Now you will help me, and then I will help you, the blonde answered him. I don't feel like helping you at all, thought Gwank. And then a crazy idea came to him, how to fulfill the request and take revenge on the arrogant princess. Okay, I'll do it right away, he shouted to her. The blonde gave him a surprised look. Gavanik hit her on the neck with the edge of his palm, in a place that could have been strangled. The blonde instantly blacked out and fell onto the pillow. And this is not violence at all, just an effective lullaby, Gwynek thought with satisfaction as he looked at her. The prince sat there, dumbfounded by what he had seen, and remained silent. Do you want one too? Gwynek asked him, showing him his punching hand. The prince looked him in the eye angrily and remained silent. Gwynek mentally told him to go away and decided to go to bed. That night, everyone slept sweetly except for the prince. I can't wait for the next night, Gwynek thought with satisfaction as he looked at him. The second day was hectic, right from the morning. The bald instructor gave the first order for everyone to get ready and run, and all the students ran. After yesterday's workout, each of them had a sore body. Someone in the crowd was constantly complaining about muscle pain, and it was just a warm-up, namely a basic endurance training that included running and strength training. The second lesson was conducted by Nuna, who told everyone that the body of an immortal cannot be called invincible, and there are many weaknesses in it, one of them being the chin. She put the applicants in pairs, and they started to fight. Gwank was paired with a guy he didn't know, who told him he had a little experience in wrestling. Really? Gvanek asked him again. Just, let's not have lunch. His partner shouted at him and rushed at him. He grabbed Gvanek by his lower body and knocked him completely off his feet. Gvanek, who did not expect such zeal, took a step back, and he hit his opponent with all the ointment in his face. Nuna approached them and saw Gvanek's opponent lying on the floor, grunting, and Gvanek made excuses that he was just lucky. That was the first close combat training session. The third lesson was taught by instructor Svichka, and Gvanek saw a familiar picture of knives sticking out of the ground, and he had to run through them. The red-haired boy screamed at what he saw. Do they want everyone to cut their legs? Candle ordered everyone to run. Havanik calmly assessed the situation. The blades were sticking out about 3 centimeters, and he remembered how his teacher had shown him 15-centimeter blades. And he ran, trying very hard to look weak and that he was in pain. A week of training went by like that. Gavanik stood in his room and thought with satisfaction whether the prince would refuse today or not. He decided to ask him a couple more times and go to bed. He stood and looked at everyone in the room and thought it was so funny that the prince was turning his back on him, but he couldn't understand what was happening. Gwangyuk asked the green-haired man what was going on. Did the prince order everyone to shut their mouths? Johan Hyun told him that he did that last night when everyone was sleeping. The prince left the room because he couldn't sleep, and he got into a conflict with the boys from the other room who were also awake, and he beat them badly. And because of this incident, a few people look at them differently today. Gwangyuk listened and thought that Hyun was not afraid to say all this in front of the prince. Suddenly, he listened and heard someone approaching the room, and it was not just one person. It's my problem and I'll deal with it myself, the prince grumbled. And no one ever thought to solve problems for you, thought Gwynek. At that moment, 3 boys entered the room, their faces full of hatred and determination. Everyone in the room tensed up because of the intruders. The guy standing inside loudly asked who Yu Kwang-ik was. He repeated the question loudly again. Who is Yu Kwang-ik? Gwangyuk raised his hand in surprise and said I, thinking that the prince had blurted out his name. So it's you? The guest frowned and began to look at him closely. Yes, what's wrong? Gwynek asked him in surprise. I want to dream about you too. The guest's face instantly changed. He became unhappy and almost cried. The whole room watched them, and Hyun gave a loud squeal of surprise. I'm sorry, but I like girls. Gwangyuk answered him loudly. But knock me out too, I heard that you all sleep like babies, the guest shouted with desperation in his voice. We're really going to die of fatigue soon. Be a friend and help us. The guests began to interrupt each other. But how did you all know about me? Gwank asked them. The rumors about you have spread throughout the neighborhood, and everyone knows everything, the guest answered him. Didn't you know? Johan Hyun's mouth doesn't shut, the guest added, and laughed out loud. He told us that if we asked you like that, you would help us. Gwangyuk now understood why Hyun was laughing so hard. What's the matter? Is this a difficult request for you? His guest asked again. No, it won't take long, laughed Gwank. That night, at the request of the guys from the first team, each of them was assigned a punch in the neck. Gvank went up to each of them, and, with the words, "May you dream about me," he turned them off. The next morning at breakfast, Gavanik was sat down by yesterday's guest, who was the leader of the first team. The guy was happy and satisfied. He hugged Gavanik and said that last night was a paradise in his golden arms. Gavanik pulled away and said that everyone was watching and hearing them, and people might think the wrong thing. So they continued their training. The bald instructor was shouting at everyone, "How long are they going to stop warming up? Are they not going to develop?" He was angry and irritated as always, and he glared at all the students. And he exclaimed again that it was not like that in his time. At this point, he looked at the fat man who was barely running and continued to comment that today's immortals can't even control their weight anymore, either because they are lazy or protesting, and those who don't run on time should be punished. At that moment, the carpenter was running past the fat man and stopped. The poor fat man also stopped, and he hugged a tree in exhaustion to keep from falling over, and vomited. The carpenter got scared and asked if he was okay. The fat man told him to ignore him and keep running. "What about you?" asked Gvank again. "I still won't be able to finish again," the fat man answered him sadly, sitting down exhausted under a tree. "Have you read the Japanese manga Crown Throw? It says that you have to become a man who does not know how to give up. Is he making fun of me?" thought the fat man nervously. "I'm staying here," he wailed and cried bitterly. "If you're going to give up, you shouldn't have started in the first place." Gwanky shouted and began to shake him by the chest. "I'll help you finish," suddenly said Gwank with a smile. He took the fat man by the hand and ran, telling him to control his breathing and not to drag his feet because he would get tired faster. If it's too hard, you can just walk fast. The bald instructor stood there silently watching these two strange boys. The crowd of applicants stood and watched them as well, and someone in the crowd said sarcastically that they were dating? "Time's up," the instructor shouted loudly. Finally, the fat man and Gwanky reached the crowd. "-5 points for both of you," the instructor shouted loudly. "It's okay," whispered Gwank. The fat man couldn't speak at all because he was out of breath, and then he said that Gwank was crazy. Did you doubt my sanity instead of apologizing? Gwank asked him again. Don't worry, my mental health is fine, so let's finish tomorrow for sure, Gwanky shouted to the fat man. Why? The fat man asked him again. Why did you help me? He asked Gwanek again. Why do you have to have a reason? Asked Gwanek. You see, without a moral duty, I am nothing, he added pompously. In order to help a person who has fallen to the ground out of powerlessness or started to drown, no reason is needed. I am sure that such a person thinks the same way, so no reason is important to me, he added. The training session ended, and the guys went to the locker room. Haban asked Gwanek if he would also put the first team to bed tonight. Yes, I probably will, the boy replied. I'm asking you to put our leader to bed too, because his black eyes are endless, Hyun asked him. Gwanek replied that he offers to help him every night, but he grimaces and turns away, which is very funny. You're both quite a pair. Hyun laughed, and they looked at the prince together. By the way, why is Gwitai Hyun so gloomy? Gwangyuk asked the green-haired man. And he told him that recently there was a food stampede in the cafeteria, and Hyun was also in it, and their blonde girlfriend was there. She had lost her wallet, and Hyun found it and read that her name was Woo Mi Ho. The guy happily returned her wallet, saying that they had been sharing a room for a week and still didn't know each other's names. I'm Mr. Gui, he introduced himself. And I don't care, the blonde replied, taking the wallet and leaving. After this incident, this is how he walks, the green-haired man explained. Gwangyuk came up to Hyun and patted him on the shoulder, saying that he should stop being so upset. Didn't he know what kind of character this blonde had? The guy stood there as if crushed, just mumbling that her name was Woo Mi Ho. Suddenly, he looked at Gwanek and blushed. His eyes sparkled, and he said that even her name was beautiful. Everyone thought he was in love, and Gwanek thought irritably that maybe he had hit his head during training. I liked her from the beginning, he finally admitted to the guys. Gwangyuk indignantly told him that she was not what he wanted. Hyun asked him irritably what he knew about her, and then he hissed at him to shut up because he was serious. Look, I warned you, Gwank told him, and at that moment, he reached his room with the boys and was dumbfounded to see a huge line of applicants at their door. Oh, you Kwa-ik has come. I heard that after his lullabies you wake up in the morning as if you were born. And no problem, one of the guys shouted. Gwank stood there with square eyes, everyone in the line saying something to him. I am the leader of the 5th team, help me. We also want to dream about you, and help the 4th team, and us. Everyone was shouting at him. Gwangyuk and the redhead looked at Hyun irritated, as he had made it clear. I had nothing to do with it, I was just praising you, he exclaimed, finally admitting. At that moment, Gwank was frantically thinking, assessing his strength. How long would it take him to put everyone to sleep? He thought that for a perfect sleep, he had to control the force in accordance with the physical condition of the person, and it might take an hour or more. So Gwank silently began to put everyone to sleep one by one, and the night turned out to be enchanting. One of the last to be put to sleep was a girl with purple hair, and a guy approached her, but she suddenly stopped him. She asked him if it was necessary for the dreams to be about him. Let you dream about Kangdong and Wonbin, Gwangyuk said, and he knocked her out with a punch to the neck. Like that, day after day, he had to bless everyone to sleep, until one night when he was done. Gwynek looked at the familiar bed in his usual way. He did not forget the daily ritual, and walked over to the prince's bed. He was lying there, looking tiredly at Gwynek, who asked him the usual question. Is it like usual today? The prince's face was tired and had deep bruises under his eyes. He hardly ever slept, but he never asked Gwanek to put him to sleep. With the words distance, the boy turned away from him. Everything happened as usual. Since it was the same every time, Gwanek didn't even hate him. He was used to it. Over time, the boy got the hang of his lullaby. As a result, every day there was a long line of people waiting for him, and he was like a robot, turning everyone off one by one. The applicants were pulling the ones who had fallen asleep, and it all looked like some kind of crazy assembly line. Insomnia united everyone, and the instructors did not pay attention to everything that was happening and pretended not to see anything. That's why most people fell asleep at Gwanek's hand, and he became quite famous for it. He was called the sleeping pill. Later, all the applicants started calling him Nek Kwan Ik. They removed his surname and gave him their first name. But this had its advantages, as everyone tried to treat him to something. Most of the time, it was sweet Twix bars, which Gwank loved. This is how the physical training came to an end. On the projector screen, the lecturer displayed photos of aliens of different kinds. That was the name of the monsters that came out of the black hole, he explained. 20 years have passed since they emerged from the other world, and the numbering system is a system that helps to identify such creatures, the lecturer said. The numbering started with 1, the higher the number, the later such a monster appeared. The lecturer offered to look at the photos of monsters on the tablets distributed, which also contained photos of the fight against them. The tablets showed the monsters that appeared most often, and one should be careful with them, because even an immortal can make a mistake if he does not learn to distinguish between them. But there are some strangers from whom it is better to run away and not fight. Then the instructor moved on to the monsters, which had their own names. The number of the alien meant its species, and those that were named had their own names, the instructor said. He gave an example of a monster called the Black Knight, and said that this monster had slaughtered almost 500 armed soldiers during the appearance of a black hole. This monster had 2 iron wings on its back and engines on its legs. It could reach speeds of up to 150 kilometers per hour, and 2 blue energy blades came out of its hands. Gvanek read this description in his tablet. And then Gvanek realized that the Farum company was part of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Security, and its employees penetrate black holes or destroy the aliens who have emerged. Even though the country was calm now, people still saw the threat of another attack by those monsters. And that's why such warriors and companies were always needed. Gvanek thought that this company paid a good salary, and he was very happy about this fact, and that's why he thought he didn't need to go to the army or the navy. The boy was sitting in the classroom thinking that if they met a real nightmare, they should run away from it as fast as they could. But Gvanek was thinking that he could not understand why his father sent him here, where there was so much danger. At that moment, the lecturer said that the applicants would have a test, and so everyone had to study everything on their tablets. So they got new subjects, and one of them was a lecture on aliens. The second lecture was given by Nuna, and it was about things that help immortals in battle, and she showed a tube and called it Bloody Jack, and explained that if one of them finds himself in a critical situation, he should open the tube and insert it into his hand, because this device can find a vein and fill it with blood. It contains a mixture of stimulants, sedatives, and ground-up leaves of the herb Enger in certain proportions. If you press down on the tube with force, the needle of the tube will pierce the skin due to air pressure, and the medicine will go inside and instantly improve your abilities. We usually call it a battle potion, but its official name is the 3 Vs, Nuna said. Gvanek listened to her in amazement, but she warned everyone that if you take this potion often enough, it can be addictive and immortals are prone to it, and she warned that you can get withdrawal symptoms and suffer with them for the rest of your life. Gvanek's skin crawled with goosebumps. Nuna added that this thing was invented in Germany. It is called the Nerd's Blessing, or the Blessing of the Odin. It is one of the best mental cocktails. Besides what I said, there are other muscle shakes, Nuna said. Gvanek mockingly thought that this world is a drug addict's world. The next funeral was at the red-headed instructor's candlelight service. Everyone was given weapons and ordered to lie down at point-blank range, and he barked at everyone that not knowing and not doing are different things. After that, they ran and did strength training, followed by training in combat techniques and body conditioning. In all of this, Gvanek did not forget to help the fat man and encouraged him, and later, the other guys also began to push him to drag the fat man to the finish line. Probably due to the heavy loads and the fact that everyone was gradually getting used to this regimen, Gvanek sent fewer and fewer people to the realm of sleep each time. Over time, everyone trained their endurance well, and so the morning run became much easier. No one was out of breath, and even the fat man was able to finish on his own. Thus, a month flew by unnoticed, and the training ended. All the applicants were gathered in the courtyard, and the instructor said that luckily, no one had dropped out for penalty points. So he congratulated everyone on joining the ranks of Varim trainees, as everyone had done a good job, and finally he smiled sincerely for the first time. He was also pleased with the results. The crowd roared with joy. Everyone was shouting, "We had finally finished and now we were trainees." The red-haired instructor stopped the joyful banquet and announced that the results of the orientation would be announced shortly. Everyone was instantly quiet. He went on to explain that these results take into account training progress and the score for the written exam, and that further distribution to departments would be based on the ranking. And the top 3 will be given a cash prize. Gvanek smiled with satisfaction at these words, because in his opinion, there was nothing better in the world than money. So let's start with the third place, the instructor said. I have some guesses about second and third, but who will get first, thought Gwank. Ki hie min, the instructor shouted, and some stranger squealed with joy. It was the first time Gwank saw him. The guy jumped up to the instructor and he greeted him and shook his hand. He told him that he could apply to the department where he wanted to work, and they would consider him first. And the guy loudly exclaimed that he wanted to join the public safety team. The instructor hissed that he was a fool and that it would be decided later. The instructor almost burst out laughing at this, but still, this incomprehensible guy was lucky. Second place is next, the instructor shouted, and the crowd froze. Jonggi Nam, he shouted. This was the name of the prince who stood there with black eyes. I knew it, Gwanke thought bitterly. He was of that blood. And Gwankik remembered his conversation with the boys when he asked what the expression of this blood meant. The green-haired one had asked him if Gwanki was surely immortal. He replied, "Can't you tell by the way he looks?" The red-haired man replied that you couldn't tell exactly who Gwank was by his appearance. The green-haired man explained that Jonggi Nam was from an elite family of purebreds. Is that like aristocrats? Gwank asked him again. No, it's not that simple, the guy answered. The redhead said that it all depends on what kind of blood you inherited. Usually purebreds have a faster regeneration process and are more sensitive, which is why they control their bodies better. But this guy, Jonggi Nam, is the purest of all the purebreds. He belongs to one of the 3 highest bloodlines. Despite his lack of sleep, the prince performed well in all his training sessions and maintained strong concentration during each lesson. Gwynnec listened and thought that such abilities were more about willpower, because from the outside, it was clear that the prince was going out of his way to annoy him, but most of all, he was curious about who would win first place. The redhead suddenly said out loud that if Jonggi Nam didn't get first place, maybe he would. The green-haired guy started laughing and said that he was having problems with his head. And after that, you still call yourselves my friends? The redhead shouted at them. First place, the instructor shouted. And for some reason, Gwangyuk thought that if Jonggi Nam was second, it would probably be Wumi Ho. Wumi Ho, the instructor shouted. The blonde stood motionless, as if in a line for bread. Of course, our Sherlock Holmes, but she is emotionless, and her manners make me sick to my stomach, Gwanka thought. He didn't like her very much. But her brain was impeccable, for she quickly realized how the orientation system worked and acted accordingly. Gwangyuk watched the instructor greet Wumi Ho and remembered how she would leave her teammates behind when working together if it didn't affect her score, and if someone tried to get close to her, she would tell them to concentrate on their training. To him, she was strange and quite unfriendly. The crowd applauded the girl. All 3 winners were lined up on the podium, and for some reason, at that moment, Gwanki felt that he would be connected to them in the future. He looked at the winners and for some reason couldn't remember the name of the 3rd place winner again. The instructor told everyone to rest until tomorrow, until 2 in the afternoon. The green-haired man asked what they would do. Gwanki suggested having a party, and Red asked if they sold alcohol here. Suddenly, an instructor came into the room and looked at Gavanik and said, "Cadet number 48. Then he said that if Gavanik had time, he could come to the smoking room a little later. Gavanik agreed. The redhead asked Gavanik in surprise what he had done. The man called his number again and gave him his phone number to call when he went outside and left the room. The boys rushed to him, asking what had happened. Vanek assured them that he hadn't done anything. He thought that the man probably wanted to offer him a job in his department. From the very beginning, he had a suspicious thought in his mind that this orientation was designed to help an immortal get basic knowledge and discover his talents. But he doubted it, and at the same time, he thought that this orientation probably had another purpose. At this time, everyone in the room was talking animatedly, and the redhead was laughing and saying that, thanks to Gwank, he had a great night's sleep. A girl with a purple bob offered to meet outside the orientation. Another boy shouted that they should definitely call each other, and the quiet girl added that they would see each other at the office. Everyone was talking loudly and planning for the future. At this time, Gwank returned from the store and was surprised to see so many people. He thought he could easily get the first place, but he didn't need it. He had more important plans, so this orientation was a success for him. The green-haired man grumbled that he must have met strangers because it took him so long to get there. "It's all my popularity," laughed Gvanek, and he began to hand out the treats he had bought. The fat man grumbled that he didn't like such chips, and the green-haired man was looking for mint chocolate. Suddenly, everyone heard someone say, "May I have your attention?" and looked around. A young man in a business suit and glasses entered the room. Gvank looked at him in surprise and thought that for some reason none of the immortals had sensed the stranger, even though they were sitting there relaxed. This meant that the stranger had hidden his energy, and the stranger asked everyone to come to him and added that he had heard that there were many worthy talents this time. And he apologized for not introducing himself and said his name was Woot Nan Myant Jin. "I am the director of Havarim," he told the surprised applicants. "I am very pleased to meet you," he added. Hearing all this, everyone in the room stood up and saluted him in unison. This was Nam Myung Jin. Gwank had read about him. He was born in 1973. He had served in the Emergency Operations Group for 8 years. He was one of the first generation of immortals and had seen the whole history from the hard times to the present day. He was one of the 10 immortals who were part of the Korean branch of the current Old Forces. He told everyone to sit down because he didn't come to scold anyone and asked if they had fun at the training. The crowd shouted yes. The guest laughed and asked him not to lie. Some of the guys whispered that there was nothing fun, just pain, and that was it. Gwangik heard this and thought that Gui Tae-hyun would have too much hard office work. Nam Myung-jin laughed and said that he was glad that there were honest guys among them, and advised everyone to try hard because it would save their lives one day, and he knew it. Then he said Jonggi Nam's name, and the boy stood up in surprise. He went to the director, and he shook his hand and told him that he was a great guy. The guy thanked him in surprise. Then he called Umi-ho over and looked at her carefully. The principal told her that he had high hopes for her, and she thanked him as well. Gwang-yuk listened and couldn't understand why he was here. Was he just there to say hello to everyone, or to see the winners? Maybe he really has nothing better to do, Gvank kept thinking. At that moment, the director called his name. Gvank was not expecting it, and looked at him with round eyes. The principal repeated his name again. The guy came up to him, and Nam Myung-jin asked him if he was really a half-breed. The principal said, "That's good," he said mysteriously. "Are you 20 years old?" the principal asked, and Gwang-yuk nodded. "And do you have a girlfriend?" The boy was surprised to hear that he did not. "Good. At your age, it's just the right time to work. See you in the office," said the director with a mysterious wink. "This is not good. I actually want a relationship," thought Gwank. "Well, I have to go. I left you all a gift. Just don't overdo it," said the director, and mysteriously looked at everyone and left. The green-haired man looked at Gvanek in surprise and asked him if he was the director's illegitimate son. Why did he speak to him so mysteriously and wink at him? To which Gvanek also explained in surprise that he was seeing him for the first time, and was he really in his preferences? Was he even married? "I heard he had a daughter," the green-haired man replied. "Where do you find this information?" "It's not even in the tablet," Gvanek exclaimed, and at that moment someone slid a large box into the room. It was Nuna who slipped the box in, saying that they were all lucky, but that they would leave the very violent ones here tomorrow morning, and that they should know the limit. Gvanek happily exclaimed that it must be alcohol because he was already upset that the party would be non-alcoholic. The red-haired man approached Wumi Ho and hesitantly offered her a glass each. She was sitting there typing on her tablet, and without turning to him, she replied that alcohol was bad for her brain and she would do without it. Gwang-yuk and Yo-han-hyun looked at the upset redhead and told each other that he would not calm down and had already had 16 attempts and 16 defeats, all by knockout. Meanwhile, the fat man opened the box and looked at it in surprise. It wasn't booze, but iron cans called Blunt, a favorite cocktail of immortals. When consumed, the senses are dulled and the body becomes sluggish. This drink could even put an insomniac immortal to sleep. The redhead looked at the box carefully and said that there were exactly 10 pieces of this drink, one for each of them. Meanwhile, the green-haired man looked online and was surprised to find out that one can cost 3 million won. The carpenter happily twirled the can in his hands, saying that their director was not stingy with gifts. Suddenly, everyone heard one of the jars hit the floor. Everyone looked around and saw the prince sitting on the bed with his head down, an empty can of drink lying at his feet. He lifted his head heavily and looked at Gvanek with his eyes drained. Gvanek heard the word asshole spoken in his direction and wondered if he had said it to him. Jonggi Nam, who woke up at the slightest movement, just fell asleep with his arms outstretched. The guys looked at him in surprise and chattered among themselves. The redhead mocked Gwanky, laughingly accusing him of deliberately keeping the prince awake at night by shuffling his feet, to which Gwanky cheerfully replied that it was already a habit. Suddenly, Gwangik looked around. Wumi Ho was standing in front of him, staring at him intently. For some reason, she thanked him for his help. "You're welcome," Gwang said, surprised. "This is a thank you," the blonde said, and handed Gwangik a folded piece of paper. She asked him not to show the note to anyone. The redhead stood there numb in surprise. Red started screaming because he liked this girl. He shouted that it wasn't what he thought it was. The carpenter laughed and said he wouldn't give up because he thought he was popular. The green-haired man shouted at them all to calm down. The redhead shouted that his brain could not take it. Gvanik shouted back at him to look at himself in the mirror and left the room laughing. He wanted to read the blonde's note alone. He opened the note and read that it said that the director of the company had a habit of noticing a few applicants and continuing to observe them, that if you pass this test, you can get privileges, but if you don't meet expectations, there will be no sweet life in the company, so you have to be careful not to tell anyone about it. Gwynnett couldn't understand why the girl shared this information with him and how she knew about it, but based on the way she wrote, she knew much more. Gvenk looked at the blonde girl who fell asleep on the bed with the can in her hand and thought it was strange that she didn't drink alcohol, but didn't refuse a cocktail. A redhead approached him and demanded to see the note, and Gvankik refused, explaining that it was not what he was thinking. The green-haired man and the redhead also drank a can and fell asleep with pleasure. Gvanik also drank a blunt and passed out. Finally, their first day of work arrived. In the morning, Gvank stood in front of the tall building, anticipating the excitement. He went to the first floor and read the name External Security Team 3 on the sign, and realized that he must be there. He saw a middle-aged man sitting at a desk and thought he must be the team leader. He thought he should probably say hello, so he confidently walked into the rather cozy office. The man smiled at him and answered the phone. Suddenly, he started yelling into the phone, "Are you kidding me?" His face turned red. Then he shouted into the phone asking why he was being sent interns. He asked several times to send him at least the first and second place winners. He was very angry and paced back and forth in his office. Finally, he ended his conversation and called a female employee and ordered her to take Gvanik to the hall where everyone was working. She sat Gvanik down at the desk next to her. The boy sat silently and did not understand what was happening. The woman got up and left. She went to the director and asked what they were going to do. He replied that he did not know anything. He was upset and angry at the same time and really didn't know what to do with Gvanik. "Well, then I will take over his education," the woman replied. The director didn't hear her and muttered under his breath that he thought someone had messed up the transfer of staff, and he was carefully reading Gvanik's application form. The woman approached Gvanik and promised to show him what he would do. She put a yellow folder in front of him with the title List of High-Ranking Figures of Quarim and told him to study everything by tomorrow. She added that he should only get out of his chair to go to the toilet or to lunch. Then she showed him 2 phones, one for special services and the other for ordinary ones, and explained that when answering a call on a special service, you have to introduce yourself as it is written on the phone itself. But when the ordinary phone rings, you must never talk about immortals, werewolves, or the company's internal affairs. "No problem," Gwynnett answered her confidently. The woman got dressed and left the room. Gwynnett couldn't concentrate and get ready for work. One of the employees said that he was very lucky to have Mr. Lee as his boss and congratulated him. Another said he was glad to meet him. Still others offered to help. It was lunchtime and Gwang Yik, along with the redhead and the green-haired man, went to a local eatery for lunch. They were sitting at a table covered with national dishes, and Gvank asked the guys to ask him one question. "Do they take your brains out at work?" he asked the boys. "Of course not," they answered him in one voice. "Then I don't understand what the reason is," Gvank muttered. At that moment, the green-haired man said that he had heard something. "They say that the director interfered with Gvanik's appointment," he said. Gvanik asked him if he had personally put him there. The boys told Gwangik that the company's director usually listens to the wishes of applicants regarding departments, so it was not the first time he had interfered in personnel management, but the problem was in Gwangik's department, which is the external security team, and their work is very difficult, and they are the elite of the elite. Yu Han-hyun added that their work is indeed very difficult and demanding. He explained that the third team has a bad reputation. Gwank asked if they were mocking the interns, but it was worse. They were killing them. The boys continued to tell him what they had learned, namely that Gwanik's department head was a very famous person. He was even called the Butcher because he twisted the brains of all the newcomers, and he must have a man in his department who looked like a panda. He acts as a control tower in the company. Yo Han-hyun continued to whisper around the table that he had heard that in some circles, everyone knew about him, because he received offers to hire employees from different places every year. Vanek was very surprised to hear this. Indeed, he was not the only one who thought this man looked like a panda. The guy asked his friend what he knew about the third girl, Kim Jonah. The green-haired man told him that she was a superhuman who had been created with the help of a secret medicine. This medicine was once made by humans to contain special species. It came in the form of pills and injections, and it gave humans forbidden powers. That's what Gvank read in the tablet during orientation. The medicines were the result of the government's experiments in magic and alchemy, but he hadn't seen any information about how many experiments were conducted on people and how many inhumane cases there were. Sonbei was one of those people. "She is called a knife. She will cut you before your boss does," said the green-haired man. The guys were so engrossed in the conversation in the dining room that they did not notice Sonbei, who came into the room and heard their conversation. At that moment, Gwank was saying that the panda told him that he was the principal's avenger. The girl stopped and smiled. "It's more like they're the Avengers, not me," Gwank said loudly. Sonbei stood still. Suddenly, the red-haired man turned his head and noticed her, and he froze. The green-haired man also looked at her in surprise. Only Gwank, who was sitting with his back to the door, continued to drink his drink. "I think you were told to study the list of names, not to dig under us," the girl exclaimed, her blue eyes flashing. She was very angry at what she heard. And she proudly walked out of the dining room, to the mute silence of the boys. Meanwhile, a waiter came to their table with an unusual plate on a tray. The waiter touched Gvanek's shoulder and smiled mysteriously and said that it was on the house and put down a black plate with roasted pine nuts. For some reason, at that moment, Gvanek thought he was going to be screwed. At his workplace, Gwanki decided to take a break. He remembered that on the internet they say that when you're tired, you should use hypnosis. But for the guy, work was just a hobby. He started to meditate and imagine that he was a prince of an oil state who decided to try the life of a middle-class person. He was sitting next to Sonbei when the phone rang. After speaking to someone, Gwang-ik told Seongbai that the call was from Park Kwang-sung, the first team's support assistant. Seongbai irritably corrected him that it was not Sun, but Suh, and he was the head of the department, not the assistant. His department head was irritated and thought that Gwang-yuk was stupid, but the boy meditated that he loved them all very much and was an oil prince. Every day, Gwanki learned the names and switched calls, but while his colleagues were away from the workplace, some office staff shared some information with Gwanka, and one day, one of the guys came up to him and asked if he was really the powdered one. Thanks to this, Gwangik managed to recognize both sides of his team. The first one was Lee Chunbong. He was the leader and a purebred. This Chunbong was not endowed with the advantages of a purebred. He gave the impression of being primitive. He had only one thing going for him. He was the best in hand-to-hand combat in Hwarem, but he was still primitive in his behavior. He was the first among the fighters because of his fifth-class fighting skills. His vocabulary consisted mainly of swear words. The next was Lee Donghong, who was a half-breed assistant and a rather young guy. Donghong was not good at hand-to-hand combat and shooting. He was only good at his job as an assistant and was like a control tower in situations that arose. This assistant quickly recognized that he had no talent in combat, so he decided to devote himself to a job where only his brain was needed, but he kept saying, irritably, that he would one day leave this hated company. But Gwanek didn't understand why he was considered a genius, but he noticed that this guy loved anime. The next employee was Kim Jong, a simple employee who was a medically perfect person. She had outstanding abilities among the small number of civilians in Hwarem. She had served in the special forces, had A-class hand-to-hand combat skills, and B-class shooting skills. Judging her by human standards, she was the best, one of the diamonds that could be counted on one hand, except for his team leader. Kim Jong worked fast, catching everything on the fly, and didn't ask unnecessary questions, and never showed her emotions. Gwank recalled what his friends had said, that only the elite get to work in his department, and he had the same opinion about his colleagues. A week passed as the guy worked in the company of his dreams. An unknown man wearing dark glasses walked into the room with surveillance screens hanging all over the wall. The operator looked at him in surprise, realizing that no one had the right to enter such a facility. At that moment, the head of the department came into the room with all the employees. The stranger asked if this was the third security team. The department head confirmed that it was. For some reason, Guangyuk thought it was Zhongyi Nam's supervisor, and the stranger said his name. Everyone started looking at the screens together. The dispatcher spoke into the microphone. "Are you warmed up?" "Now I'm taking it up," and everyone began to watch someone carefully. The screen showed a guy who was affected by something and could not get up. Havaniak remembered that they said there would be some kind of test. He did not understand what was happening. The dispatcher loudly explained that this device controls gravity and was created on the basis of new technologies found outside the gate. The anime fan irritably told him that he didn't have to go on, because everyone already knew that. Someone from the department reminded him that Gwank was an intern. He waved his hand and asked him to keep it short. The guy stood in the middle of the room, and the dispatcher explained that you can feel gravity when you enter the room, and that the current record is 9G's acceleration. You just need to do a few simple exercises, such as running on the spot 10 times, doing push-ups 10 times, running in a circle with your hand pressed against the wall. "Since our boss set a record, he skips his turn," said the dispatcher. The anime guy and Kim Jong unanimously said that they were also skipping because they had already taken the test. That left only the trainee Gwangeek. The stranger looked at the test subject with satisfaction and muttered that Gi Nam could withstand 5 Gs of gravity. The dispatcher increased the gravity to 5, and the test subject gritted his teeth and sprawled on the floor of the room. For some reason, Gwangyuk found it funny and had to hold back his laughter with all his might. Kim Jong noticed this and said angrily that Gwangyuk was having so much fun. She told him to shut up and be quiet. Gwangyuk kept silent forcibly. The test subject suddenly passed out. The anime guy laughed and said that it was Gwank's turn and it would be harder than giggling. Gwank was about to enter the test room when the head of the department looked thoughtfully at the screen and muttered that the guy in the room was supposed to be on their team. The hardware engineer was getting ready for the test. He didn't understand what was going to happen, and this ignorance, to be honest, scared him. He went into the test room and stood in the center. The observers in the control room were also visibly nervous, as this was the first time the trainee had taken this test, and one of them even said, "Aren't they going too far with Gavanik?" Another one told him that he should remember how many people had turned into cripples after real-life tasks. Kim Jong and the anime guy watched Gwangyuk with interest. She mysteriously said that she would rather have an obedient dog than a useless piece of junk. And the anime guy answered her that Gwanki didn't know anything and would hate them later. "So what? Do they take us for fools when they bring in someone they don't know?" said the head of the department calmly. "So let's warm up." The dispatcher answered him and began to press buttons on the remote control. For some reason, the head of the department told everyone without fear that they should quickly throw Gavanik out. It would be best for everyone. "It would be better than this bastard getting himself an insensible sadism," said the manager, and continued that this is a special disease that manifests itself exclusively in immortals. It is similar to a mental illness in which you lose all sensations of the body, and when you see the pain of another, you remember what you no longer feel. Immortals who go crazy because of this disease are as dangerous as werewolves who go crazy because of a lack of water. The manager was silent and thought that he was sure that when Gvank left the room, he would be sent to the information department or the back office. Working with data was safe, which meant that it was just right for a half-breed and someone who hadn't shown any talent in orienteering. The manager sighed. He didn't understand what the director was thinking when he brought Gwanich to their department. The dispatcher increased the gravity in the test room to 4G. Kim Jong and the anime guy watched Gwangyuk with interest. The girl noticed that the guy was holding up quite well and didn't faint, which means he almost passed the test, which is pretty good for a beginner. The nail technician was pushed to the floor by gravity, but did not fall. The supervisor watched and thought that this guy had become more capable, but their team needed more talented pros who could work with them right away, not those who needed more babysitting. "He has no change in his movements," the manager thought irritably. "What's the speed now?" someone asked the dispatcher. He answered that it was 2 Gs. "Increase it," ordered the manager, and the dispatcher began to increase it first to 5 GI, then to 7 G, and finally to 8 GI. And something incredible happened. Gavanik got up from the floor and stood on his feet and began to perform the exercises that were announced for the test. Everyone in the control room was numb and staring at the screens in amazement. The dispatcher could not say a word either. "Should I raise it further to the level of 10 G? The dispatcher asked the head of the department, frightened. The latter stood there frowning, and at the same time, impressed, silent. There was a noise from the door of the test room, and everyone in the control room looked at each other. It was Gvanek, who started running under the frantic gravity, testing his own capabilities. It was really hard for him, but not critically impossible. He just had to make an effort. As he ran, he remembered his squad leader whining about how the previous guy was so great and should have been on their team. Gwang-yuk sincerely did not understand why he did not like him so much and how he was worse than Jong-nam. Then he remembered the giggling of the IT guy he called a panda, and his fists itched with hatred. Then he remembered Kim Jong, the ice princess with no emotions, whom Gwang-yuk liked even less because she would at least sometimes explain things to him, but he was annoyed by her reclusiveness and really didn't understand the reasons. He continued to run, gaining momentum under the crazy gravity, and it didn't bother him to think at that moment that he still didn't know what his team was doing, and that annoyed him as well. The guy fell to the floor, but managed to get up on his outstretched arms at that moment, wondering how many of those GIs were added to him. The strength was similar to the last level of werewolf training. Gvanek began to be pressed back to the floor. The guy kept his balance with all his might and thought at that moment that the poorly trained body of an immortal was very close to the body of an ordinary person. So such pressure felt like all the internal organs were being squeezed. No wonder his previous one had passed out. The pressure increased more and more. Gvanek was holding on with his last strength, but he thought that his friends would hardly have survived it. The guy was holding on with his legs and arms outstretched and wondered how long this would last. He really wanted to rub everyone's noses in it and show them that he was better than their pet. Gvanek decided to impress everyone with his skills to the fullest. At that moment, he heard the voice of intern Yu Kwang-ik over the speaker. How much is 8 times 9? He wondered if everyone thought that he didn't know the multiplication table and hadn't been asked this question by his predecessor. 72, the boy shouted loudly to the whole room. It's quite simple. This guy's talent seems to be quite high, as well as the results of the orientation, so try with 2-digit numbers, said the head of the department. The dispatcher asked Gvanek, how much is 12 times 22? 264, Gvanek exclaimed loudly. Everyone in the control room fell silent. Kim Jong asked everyone present if Gwang-ik was sure he wasn't in a trance. The anime guy answered that there are drug cocktails that improve mental and physical condition, but they are almost impossible to get. The head of the department listened to them and said that they would only know this after the test and drug analysis. And if the result is positive, what then? Kim Jong asked him again. I don't know. The head of the department abruptly cut her off. Training is over. Gwank heard the cherished words from the speaker. It was a good gravity workout. My body felt light right away, but I wanted to do it longer because I feel like my strength has increased, Gwank thought as he left the room. He decided that he could feel all this because of the good mixture of immortal and werewolf blood. The boy heard Kim Jong's voice saying that she would open the door for him and heard the click of the lock. The door opened, and she looked at the boy closely and said that he did a good job and handed him a handkerchief to wipe his sweat. The handkerchief was surprised to take it, not knowing why he needed it, and went into the control room. The anime guy sneered in his direction. The head of the department barked in his direction, asking Gvankik to return to his workplace and not to stand there like a stranger. He ordered the dispatcher to look at the results of all the trainees, and the dispatcher looked at him in surprise. The head of the department was annoyed with Gwanek, namely that the head did not recognize that he was better than Jonggi Nam. The dispatcher called Gwanek over to him. He cheerfully introduced himself as being from the internal management team and responsible for technical equipment. The dispatcher was instantly interested in Gvanek. What did you want from me? He asked the dispatcher, thinking it would be cool to meet him in a one-on-one training session. At that moment, the manager barked at the dispatcher to open the test results as soon as possible. Gvanek was shoved out of the room. Gvanek was not upset that he was kicked out. He was pleased to think that the manager had shown great interest in his person, and his personal supervisor had stayed to check his results. In his mind, Gwang-yuk was complaining to himself about how long he could be treated like garbage. At that moment, Kim Jong called out to him and added that Gwang-yik had a very happy face. I understand, I'll fix it, he laughed back at her. Kim Jong looked back at him and wished him good luck. Gwang-yuk stared after her, wondering if she had really wished him good luck. The girl's voice seemed to be stuck in his head. Don't just stand there, get to work, the anime guy shouted at him. I'm coming, the boy cheerfully shouted to them. This meant that he was accepted as a full-fledged member of the team, and he began to believe that he would be entrusted with important tasks. Entering his office, Gvanek was surprised to see thick books on his desk. Someone had thrown them at him from his co-workers. He cursed mentally, because he had hoped for something else. "What is this?" he asked the anime man in displeasure. The first folder was about the numbering of aliens, the second about the types of potions, and the third about the rules for using the equipment and its structure. "I don't need it," Gwennick thought. "And to which page?" "You're learning everything," the anime guy replied with satisfaction. "Well, in principle, I can do it in 3 months of practice," he thought, when the anime guy added that he had to do it all in 4 days. He looked at him and thought in surprise that he must be out of his mind, asking how this information would help him. The head of the department overheard their conversation and asked him if their intern thought that everyone was treating him unfairly. He walked past the guys and told them that numbering is the basis. How will you fight the enemy if you don't know their characteristics? If you don't want to be in the stomach of a stranger and not turn into waste, then learn. The anime actor added that Gwenki has to know his body in order to use potions in the right proportions, because fighting without the right cocktail is equivalent to fighting without weapons on the battlefield. Kim Jong also chimed in and added that without knowledge of the structure, Gwangik would not be able to use things, because just knowing the rules of use and understanding the structure of a weapon are completely different things, so he has to do what he is told. But it's not possible to learn all this in 4 days, Gwangik was worried. The anime guy told him that he only needed 1 day to do it all. The head of the department added that he had done it in 2 days, and Kim Jong said that she had learned everything in 3 days. The guy fell silent in surprise. "It's not that simple," the department head said to Gwangyuk angrily. "In 4 days, there will be a test on all this," the anime guy added. "For one wrong answer, you'll spend an hour in the training room," he added, laughing. "If it's so hard for you, and it's impossible for you, you can get out of here," the department head barked at Gwanki. He was obviously in a bad mood today, and the boy was visibly annoying him. Gwannik sighed and loudly told everyone that he would look into it and picked up the yellow pack. He was not so excited about his work anymore. Kim Jong gave him a sideways glance without saying a word. The anime guy smiled evilly too, without saying a word. The department head didn't react to his words at all. Meanwhile, in the control room, the employee was counting the test results, his fingers quickly typing something on the keyboard. He was silently staring at the screens, and his face was getting more and more puzzled. The dispatcher said mysteriously. At that moment, the head of the department came in and asked him briefly, "Which one?" He answered him, "First place, and you've asked me 12 times already." "Are you satisfied with this answer?" asked the dispatcher, irritated. "No, I'm not. I don't understand how this fool could be so strong," the head of the department replied. The dispatcher tried to explain to him that this was an unusual case, and most likely, the only thing that could explain it was innate talent. At the same time, he thought that it was very rare for an immortal to be born with such a phenomenal physical form. Even training has its limits if he has such a great talent. "If you want to kick this guy out, you better transfer him to my team," said the dispatcher, to which the manager sharply refused. "Is the supervisor or Lee Junbong going to train this trainee?" thought the supervisor as he followed the department head out. The carpenter sat on a chair in the middle of the office and tried to answer questions without preparation. The first question he was asked was, why is the probationary period called that? The guy answered that during this time, he was being trained in everything necessary for office work and at the same time checked whether the employee was a good fit or not. He went on to explain the meaning of the word trainee, that it is a person who is in the process of learning the job, and that was him. The next question was asked by Kim Jong, namely, what material are bulletproof vests and vests for stab wounds made of? "Ballistic fabric and Kevlar," Gwank replied. The anime guy said quietly, "Wow." And the head of the department hissed that anyone would know. He was in a bad mood again. Only Kim Jong was looking at the guy in surprise. The gadget maker continued to answer that these materials are more durable than diamonds and can deflect bullets with blades, as well as protect against high and low temperatures. The next question was asked by the head of the department, and he briefly said number 64. The guy became agitated and asked again, who was number 64? At the same time, he thought he had to quickly recall the correct answer. "The Wheeled Knight," he replied, somewhat uncertainly. The manager noticed this and asked if he was sure of his answer. Gvank said more firmly that he was. He thought to himself that he was not very sure about it, but repeated out loud that it was the exact answer. The head of the department hummed something. "Stop talking to me if you're not sure. Don't bet. Go away," the manager said more gently. Gvanek smiled and told him that he understood. 4 days later, the exam began. On average, there were 10 questions per day, and every time Gvank was wrong in 3 of them. What workout should I start with today? He thought every day. The Havarim company spared no expense on its equipment, and thanks to this, it was possible to recognize different training zones in the building. The first zone was the fitness room, which was run by Nuna. She walked into the gym and greeted Gvanek. The guy also greeted her politely. Nuna cheerfully teased him that she thought he worked out here more than he ate. "I'm just trying to persevere," he replied, unable to tell Nuna that it was actually his endless failures on the test. Nuna cheerfully replied that she was very happy to see him in this room. The next room was the pain endurance room. It was run by a red-haired instructor whose main motto was, "Enjoy the pain." Gavankov also politely greeted him. The red-haired man, who was in meditation, muttered that he was surprised that Gwank was still alive. The guy thought irritably about his ill-mannered and incomprehensible attitude towards him. And there were other halls where Gvanek trained his visual acuity by running between iron logs to avoid getting caught on them. In the next room, he trained blindfolded to restrain his senses. Then Gvank fought with electronic holograms of aliens, honing his skills and so on. One of the instructors in the room, unable to stand his assertiveness, said irritably, "Have you come again?" To which Gvanek explained that his body had become like stone. The instructor explained that it was enough to do pain tolerance training once a week. The guy noticed that all the instructors were looking at him as if he were crazy and insane. After finishing his training, Gwanky went to his office, and on his desk was an unfamiliar folder, and he asked the anime guy what it was. He was silent and fidgeted mysteriously. His smile grew bigger and bigger, and Gwank tensed up at the sight. He took the folder and sat down to read it. The anime guy loudly told Gwank that if it was too hard for him, he knew where to go, and that Yoongi Nam and Woomi Ho had already studied everything, to which the head of the department replied that he had found someone to compare with and threw an angry look at the boy. The next day, Gwank came home to find his mother waiting for him, who had prepared a delicious dinner. The table was covered with plates of the boy's favorite food. But upset, Gvanek asked her where his father was. The woman replied that he had gone on another business trip. The boy ate in silence and thought. He hadn't seen his father for a month, and he really needed to ask him about his work. And at that moment, he remembered that he would not be able to share secret information with him. Gwanky sighed and asked his mother about his work. He told the surprised woman that he was being mistreated in the company. She asked him, frightened, if he was beaten there. Vanik laughed and explained that he felt that he was being overworked more than necessary. The mother smiled and only replied that it seems that her son is getting recognized. But it's very difficult, the son told her sadly. The woman suggested that he quit in that case. But Gvanek liked the coolness of his company. "No," Gvank replied sharply, thinking, "Why is he complaining?" "You don't want to leave because of the money?" she asked again. Money was a big reason for him too. "I just don't want to," he muttered. "This is the path I chose, and I think it will lead me to the goal I've invented the fastest," Gvank continued to think. Finally, everything fell into place in his head, and he was determined not to quit his job in Kfarim just yet. The next day at the office, the anime guy slyly asked him for his number 65, and Gwank confidently answered him, "Wheeled Knight." He sat down at the desk and was given a sample report, and the boy began to study it carefully. Then, as usual, he had endurance and distance training on the treadmill. Then he studied one of the volumes with the yellow cover again. He answered the phone non-stop. His head was spinning. 2 weeks had passed since his employment began. Gvank was sitting at his desk, leaning back in his chair, thinking that he had fulfilled all his duties for the day, that he had more or less learned what he needed to learn. Opening the manual again, he carefully examined the structure of the Farim company. Farim had 4 headquarters, including internal security and external security. The external security team had only 3 tasks. The first was to help in the designated areas if there were any disasters or a black hole appeared. The second task was to stop terrorist attacks by special kinds of monsters, but that was usually the responsibility of the second security team. He'd even heard that the police had people in their special immortal unit. And the third task was to support the other teams. Unlike the other groups, which were mostly purebloods, Gwanek's team had a pureblood leader, a half-breed assistant, Sungbeo, a medically enhanced human, and he was a trainee mix of an immortal and a werewolf. Therefore, the main goal of the third team was still support. It dawned on Gvanek at that moment that it must be normal for his colleagues to be so free. The guy sighed and decided to go for a workout. When he left the office, he found his supervisor and Yumi Ho in the corridor, talking to each other in a half-hearted manner. The supervisor asked the girl, "Is that what you thought, everyone, and you weren't deceived?" Wumi Ho replied, "I think so too." Their conversation seemed strange to the boy. Suddenly, the manager noticed Gwanek and turned around. "Intern?" he shouted in the boy's direction. He calmly replied, "Yes, trainee Yu Kwang-ik," and gritted his teeth. "Are you going to have fun training?" It was obvious that the manager did not know what to say to Gwang-yuk, who suddenly appeared. Gwang-yuk confirmed that he was going to practice, but the teacher asked him a strange question again. Was he a bully in school? "No, I wasn't," Gvank replied, surprised. "You didn't beat anyone up?" "According to the stories of others, it seems to me that he did. The headmaster picked on him." "There were no bullies in my school," Gvank sharply replied, who was also annoyed by the headmaster. "Why is that?" The man kept up with him. "I said I wasn't involved in bullying others or anything like that," Gvank raised his voice. "And that everyone listened to you directly? Have young people gone completely stupid now?" The manager kept up, provoking Gvanek. "Well, they listened to me anyway," Gvanek shouted at him. The whole office watched them in surprise. Gvanek couldn't understand what the man wanted from him and why he was buckling down. He was swearing through every word, and the manager was already yelling at the guy. "It looks like our trainee is not as simple as everyone thinks," the supervisor shouted at him. And at that moment, he stretched out his fists with the question, "Do you know how to box?" Gvanek was surprised to hear that he could. "Then how about a duel?" the boss shouted, standing in a stance. Wumi Ho watched in amazement. The other team members were also tense, as they had never seen anything like this before. The carpenter stood there and remained silent. The office was completely silent. "Fine, have it your way," he shouted, hatred shining in his eyes. "How does that suit you?" The head of the department kept up with Gvanek. Then he turned to the entire department and asked who wanted to watch the show after lunch. Everyone looked at him in shock and remained silent. Umiho also watched this strange argument and thought only one thing: idiot. The manager turned to Gwanek again and pointed to his chest and exclaimed that if that's the case, they would meet in the gym, but now he should go and rest and remember to eat, but not too much so that he doesn't get sick. "Miho, you're the backup," the manager threw at the girl. "I think this is a waste of time," she thought and grimaced. "Do you know that I evaluate your performance as well?" The boss barked at her, noticing her expression. "I understood. I'll cover you," she replied quietly. But just in case, he announced that he was going to replace me with Young-woo in case something happened. "If you refuse, there will be no turning back," he growled at Gwang-yuk. "Don't worry, that won't happen," Gwang-yuk proudly replied. It was already 5:30, and Gwang-yik and Umiho stood at attention looking at the leader. The girl quietly asked Gwang-yik why he had done that and provoked the manager. Gwang-yik cheerfully replied that office work is very simple. Do what you're told and what you're not told, and bring the boss whatever he needs. "Are you saying that it was the boss's personal wish?" she asked in surprise. "Well, to be more precise, he had been itching for a long time," the guy answered. Umiho looked at him and asked if he was offended by her. "Not at all," Gwang-yuk replied cheerfully. "You sound very convincing, but I can see that you're still pouting," the girl continued. "I'm not pouting, I just didn't want to miss this chance," Gvanek tried to convince her. It was a chance to test the best C-ranked fighter, the leader Lee Junbong. "Can I skip the warm-up?" Gwank asked the leader. "But I've already warmed up," the leader replied. Kim Jong quietly told Lee Junbong not to make a cripple out of Gwang-yik. "Don't brag, just try to hold out as long as you can," Wumiho whispered to Gwang-yik. "Are you ready? Attack!" the leader shouted to Gwanek as he stood in front of him in the hall and spread his arms. Hatred and anger flashed through Gwang-yuk's mind, and all his muscles instantly tensed, his forehead sweating. Clenching his fists, he rushed to attack the leader, who stood calmly and did not even move. Gvank decided to attack him lightly at first. The manager calmly dodged Gwanek's fists. The guy used a jab combination on his opponent, but the latter confidently dodged every attack. The guy attacked again and again, but never once did his fist reach the manager's body. "You think you're going to hit me?" the manager shouted at him with a satisfied face. "How clever are you?" the guy thought irritably, not understanding how he could hit him. "Okay, I think one punch will be enough," thought Gwank, building at least some strategy. "I'll show the boss that I'm open," he decided, and spread his arms to reveal his body. But the manager also decided to attack at that moment and finally took a step towards his opponent. And they both clashed with their fists. It seemed that even everyone heard the crack of this simultaneous double punch. In Miho, Kim Jongta and the rest of the office staff seemed to be numb with horror and unable to make a sound. The manager's fist still hit Gwanik's face, and the boy began to fall helplessly to the floor. What? Ran through his head. His hand was shaking and his head was ringing. He lost his balance and was shaking. He looked at his supervisor and his eyes were tripling. This feeling was painfully familiar, and he tried to remember when he had experienced something like this before. That's right. He finally remembered the moment when he felt it. It was the very day his mom brought him to the gym. They were both boxing in the ring, and the mother didn't spare her son so much that people around her shouted at her, "Is it possible to treat your own son like that?" The mother beat him so hard that the boy was shaking. "It's okay, we're not raising our son to be a weakling, and besides, if he made a mistake, he has to take responsibility for it," she exclaimed. At the time, Gvanik was only 15, and his mother demanded that he fight as if he were 25. He got angry with his mother over something trivial. She scolded him for something, and she took him to the gym instead of school to train him. "This is the first time anyone has ever hit me like my mother," Gvanik thought. "Well, are you awake?" the supervisor shouted at him, who came up to him and looked at him intently. "Are you going to continue?" he asked Gvanik. Gvanik sat on the floor and tried to recall step by step what had happened to him. He remembered how they had simultaneously made their fists. Then the boss reached out and grabbed his forearm, and at that moment he felt very painful. And at that moment, he felt that the manager had broken the bones of his shoulder. The pain was insane. Then, with uncertainty, he recalled that the leader had hit him on the head, and the pain was incredible. It was very fast and clear. "I will be able to fight back if my arm recovers," Gvanik thought chaotically. "What? Are you mad because you got hit despite being a regular? Who do these young people take adults for?" his supervisor asked. Gwanik was silent, and only in his head was a monologue going on, namely that he told himself that he wanted to test the skills of his supervisor, but in reality, it was a duel between a werewolf and an immortal. Gwanik was really confident of an easy victory. He admitted that he was too overconfident. He got to his feet and stood in a stance, clenching his fists resolutely. "No more slacking off now," he thought, and said out loud, "One more time," as he prepared to fight. The boss smiled evilly. Some fierce anger flashed in his eyes, and it was clear that he was happy to continue. And a fierce battle began. They struck each other and twisted and turned with a special hatred for each other. Woo Mi-ho watched them calmly and somehow without much emotion. Kim Jong watched with more interest than her neighbor. The guys from the department were watching all the movements of the fighters with frantic eyes, as if reading each one and trying to learn and memorize something new, because the opponents were very worthy. One of them, watching Gvanik's movements, said out loud, "The newcomer is not so bad." To which the other replied that the manager was probably still giving in. It was as if Gvanik had a second wind, and he attacked his boss again and again with a special zeal. The latter barely had time to dodge the guy's blows, realizing that he had a worthy opponent. The manager was really surprised by Gvanik's skills and abilities, and it was evident on his face. The guy looked into his eyes, as if into his soul, thinking that he had to calm down. The psychological struggle was also a struggle. Suddenly, the supervisor, dodging another blow, asked him, "Why are you here?" Gvanki was surprised to hear what he meant, but continued to attack. "Probably because of the money?" the manager shouted at him. The guy kept his concentration by telling himself to ignore what he was being told. He had to concentrate and strain all his senses and anticipate all his movements, Gwanki thought. Meanwhile, the supervisor shouted at him, "Crooked!" The guy stood up again and made a punch with clenched fists, then again and again. "It's a hiding of energy," Gvanki thought frantically, trying to concentrate all his strength and skills. "I can't get lost. I have to narrow my range of perception." The thought suddenly came to him. And at that moment, the leader made a frantic swing of his leg so that the boy felt the energy around him with his whole body. Maybe it's the strange heroic energy? The manager continued to ask his strange questions. Gvank looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he was talking about, and gritted his teeth in furious anger because he could do nothing to him and did not understand anything anymore. The manager swung his long legs over and over again, his energy throwing the guy around the room like a pear. His movements were too fast. It was impossible to find a moment to counterattack. Gwank was nervous and irritated, thinking, Why is Li Junbong faster than him? He should be faster than the leader because he had the strength of a werewolf. But he soberly looked at everything that was happening, and somewhere deep down, he realized that everything was not at all as he had imagined. According to his teacher, he still learned the basics, remembering his trainer in the gym. He remembered the trainer's girlfriend at the gym who trained him and wanted to tell him more about the in-depth points, but there was no time. Gvanek's situation was further complicated by the fact that his boss was a thoroughbred with vast experience. I admit, my boss is a C-ranked hand-to-hand fighter, but that doesn't mean I'm going to lose to him, Gwanek thought frantically as he attacked him again and again. If not the first reason and not the second, then what? The boss kept up with his strange questions, and he grabbed the guy's arm with all his might, stopping another punch. The force was so strong that he stopped feeling unbearable pain. The manager looked Gvanek straight in the eye and hissed, "Maybe you really want to hear the screams of girls' adoration, huh? So go sing on stage," he yelled. Gvanki was torn with rage, and he was getting out of control. And they clashed again in a furious battle built on anger and hatred. Striking each other over and over again, Gwank was sure that this was the shortest way. The way that would help him do everything he wanted to do. So the guy honestly focused on the techniques he had learned so diligently in all his training. He really wanted to become exactly what he imagined himself to be, so he tried his best and was confident of his victory. His strength was already at its limit, his breath was short, but he boxed like a robot, wet as if he had been caught in the rain. Suddenly, a terrible thing happened. At the apogee of the fight, when the guy was getting physically tired, his supervisor hit him in the eye so hard that blood spurted in all directions. The blow to the eye knocked Vanek out of the fight, and the supervisor began to attack. The guy lost his balance and began to fall frantically. In order to somehow stay on his feet, Gvank grabbed the manager's body with all his strength, as if to hug him. But even so, he squeezed him with all his remaining strength.